All right, I've got 6 o'clock. So 6 o'clock, I call this meeting in Saginaw City Council order. Please rise for the pledges. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible. Item number 2 is the invocation. For that, Mr. Patrick Farr.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Please bow your heads with me. Most gracious and Heavenly Father, we thank you for the opportunity to come together and to serve our citizens in this community. We pray for the safety of all the citizens in Saginaw as we experience this winter weather and be with the folks at home and help to keep them warm. Father, please look over us tonight. Bless the work of this council. Bless the work of this staff. It's in Christ's name that we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Patrick. Well done. All right, number 3, audit participation. That is covered on the screen. Also, I'd like to say welcome to our folks watching live online. I hope there's somebody watching live online. If not, I hope somebody catches this after it has been archived. All right, item number 4, and this is a special meeting. So item number 4, consideration action regarding charter amendments recommended by the Charter Review Commission. And it was Dolph. I know Dolph went out sick, so is it Gabe? Is it you?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, Betsy Elam is here to give you a brief overview of the Charter Review Commission's work and can answer any questions you might have.
And I can do it from here. I can come to the podium. Which would you prefer?
I think you're fine.
So, basically, your charter is, is old and hasn't been reviewed for a while, but really was in pretty good shape. We had some cleanup provisions, and your Charter Commission did a great job in considering the different suggestions that I brought up. To start out with, we have to call the election by February 15th. That's the last day to call the election. And once you approve any of the changes suggested by the Commission, then I will draft the charter propositions and bring you an ordinance to consider before the 15th so that we can have the election in May. There are publication requirements. In addition to those required by state law for elections, a substantial copy of the charter amendments have to be published twice before the election in the newspaper, so that's a consideration as well. If you have it in front of you, I can start going through it. And stop me if you have any questions. I'm going to, I think, go through it pretty quickly unless you have any questions or concerns. But the first change that we suggested was...
Excuse me, just to make sure.
Yeah.
I do have a series of questions.
Sure.
Would you like for them to be asked, what do you think, Mayor, while the presentation is going on, or just... Okay, I think that...
Yeah. So the first one is boundaries. I don't think you're going to have any issues with boundaries. You don't have any ETJ, but what your charter said that boundaries could be changed in the manner provided, and there was no manner provided, so I just thought we should provide a manner. Enumerated powers. If you looked at my comment here, what you have is really fine. It confers a broad array of home rule powers on the city and the powers to effectuate those enumerated powers. The Commission thought that it might be better to put it in plain English and just list those powers. It doesn't really change anything. It just is listing in plain English what the powers of the city are. And that kind of goes on for a while. Section 501, if you saw my comments, it's important for immunity under the Tort Claims Act for the council members actually to get paid. It doesn't have to be a significant amount, but the way 501 is currently drafted, it's a reimbursement, and so that is not a payment, and that doesn't give you the added protection that the Tort Claims Act confers on you if you're considered an employee under the Tort Claims Act. So getting paid, so we changed to $25. It's a nominal amount, but it does give you protection.
Do we need to list a dollar amount? That's my question. Do we need to just?
You don't have to
shall be
list
paid?
no.
Is that sufficient or not?
It shall be paid amount to be determined by the city council.
Well, and my thought would be $25 is fine, but
Mm-hmm.
in 10 years or 25 or 20 years, it may not be fine. I don't know. What do y'all think? That's why I wanted to give the future city councils
Mm-hmm.
maybe some latitude here.
I felt like since it was written in 1985, that $25 probably isn't sufficient in today's time. And realistically, if it was something that was increased a little bit now, or even if we left it, as you say, council approval, we can discuss an amount now, and then we don't have to go back for a vote 10 years from now if the council feels that something should be raised to. Is that legal to do it that way?
Yes, and if it's silent, actually, local government code authorizes the city council to establish payment for officers. You could say, for example, you could say a sum of $25 at a minimum or as determined by the council. You could say something like that.
But if we leave it at the $25, would that not, let's say if it goes up to 30 in 10 years, it would not make us go back through there and look at it again?
Well, that's what I was saying. If we
Yeah, I mean,
set-
that's kind of what I was getting at.
Yeah.
It's going to make us go back
It's
in
a
there
pretty
again and
expensive
keep it
thing to go
paid.
back to have a charter election for something like this.
We could say a minimum of $25. My concern is just that there is some payment, not, yeah.
Yeah, and my concern about not putting at least a starting amount is somebody will say, well, city council can give them themselves a raise anytime they want. And,
If anybody can live on that, then
Well, I know, but still.
yeah. It's not an income-producing position.
True. It's
But you also do spend a lot of time doing what you're doing, and it's not a volunteer position.
Oh, now it's on. Okay. I liked that suggestion. If I read it correctly, no less than this person that makes this much money.
Right.
You know,
it's a-
so it wouldn't be very much.
Right, it's a way
You could
to-
go up that much, but it wouldn't be a lot.
Right. I mean, and you could have any variation, and what, I think what you're reading is in my comment column. The total salary paid during the year to any entire, to the entire seven-member city council shall not exceed the annual compensation of the lowest paid permanent city employee. So,
That kind of puts a limit on, they couldn't just go way overboard with the salary. But they wouldn't have to redo the city charter if they wanted to give themselves a raise.
No, you're right, and that's what we want to avoid. We don't have to redo this charter very often. Yeah, that's. What does anybody else think about that? Either dollar amount or some kind of statement.
I believe it's appropriate that we set a floor and a ceiling, and we essentially stay silent and allow councils to establish what that range is, set the floor and the ceiling. And I like the idea of the ceiling being the total of all amounts paid to the council would not exceed the lowest paid position in the city.
okay, I can put that in.
Doesn't that still give us a lot of wiggle room? What's the lowest employee of the city? Do we know what that number is? Besides Rick. All right, let's say it's 30,000. I bet it's more than that. You would have to pay councils a lot of money to get to $30,000.
Yes.
And I was doing just some quick math this afternoon. You know, to get $100 a person, you could barely get to $10,000. So I think $100 is too much, but I don't know.
Todd?
Yes, Mary.
The other thing is, if we had this statement that said at the discretion of the council, then that could also be any amount. So I kind of like the vague ceiling, kind of not a real number. And I think if any city council did give themselves a big raise, I don't think they would last very long. So it's probably a moot point. But I think we should have the minimum amount mentioned of $25 and say that it's a payment, not.
We're getting rid of for coincidental
reimbursement.
expenses. So it's not a reimbursement, it's an actual payment.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely important, yeah, to show that we're paid employees, I guess. All right, so what do anybody think? Keep the minimum sum, $25? Everybody okay with that? Say that, and then what about, want to say the max of the total salary paid for the entire council? Want to use that statement? What does anybody think about that?
Then we could address in an open meeting what that number would be later.
We could,
So,
yeah. Just to give future councils a little bit of flexibility and not to go back to a charter review. Everybody okay with that? Is that good? Is that clear enough direction?
Yep, I
All right,
can do
thank
that. Section 502, it was previously a registered voter in the state of Texas. Actually, state law has changed, and to be a candidate, you have to be a registered voter in the city, so we made that change. Just to point out, you do have one requirement that may not be enforceable. The commission chose to leave that requirement in. It's regarding shall not be in arrears with the payment of any taxes. They thought that should be in there. And it's possibly and probably not enforceable, but it doesn't hurt to have it there.
I guess my question is, how is it not enforceable?
I didn't bring the memo, my associate did, but it's a violation of the Equal Protection Clause, probably.
So you don't have to pay your taxes and you're protected.
Yeah. Well, you're not protected. It just doesn't prohibit you from being a candidate or from voting.
I like the statement.
Yeah. Most people do, and a lot of charters have it, so.
Betsy, I'm sorry. Can we go back to number 4? I had one question there, and I forgot to bring it up as we were zooming by.
Which one?
It was 4, Section 4, Article 4, G. Article 4G. Sanitary sewer system. So the question is authority to provide the sewer system and penalties for failure to make sanitary sewer connections. What about folks with septic? How is that addressed in here?
Okay, this doesn't change the authority you already have. You have this authority. You have the authority to require that they hook up to sanitary sewer. It doesn't require you to do it.
Okay.
And this really doesn't add any authority to the city. You have this authority now.
Okay.
It's just spelling it out as the commission was recommending.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Some of these are really just cleanup, but election judges, your charter had it appointed by the city council. We said as permitted by law. You contract with Tarrant County, and so Tarrant County really will appoint your election judges.
Todd, Mr. Mayor.
Go, Mary, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I still have 2 questions on 5.02.
Okay? Okay?
Where your comment that says must clarify election date. I don't understand what that means.
Kind of shorthand for me. I'm sorry.
So that was just a note to yourself.
It was a talking point for the commission.
Okay.
And I probably should have been more. But so what the election code says is that the general rule is that you have to be a resident 6 months. A home rule charter, in a home rule charter, a city can expand that to 12 months or 1 year, but it has to specify from the date of the election. If it's longer than that, then it's going to be void. So we just want to specify the election.
So
date,
it's
the
wording,
date of the election.
the way it's worded.
Right, right.
And then I didn't understand the thing about forfeit. What that
Oh.
term is, has
That
legal
is,
significance.
that is a term of art. And what your charter says, and so a member of the council ceasing to possess any of the qualifications or any other sections of this charter or convicted of a felony while in office shall immediately forfeit office. Now, the Constitution provides that an officer serves until his successor is qualified. So if you don't forfeit your office by doing something wrong or bad, you would continue to serve until your successor is qualified. For example, in a 3-year term, if you announce that you're going to be a candidate for another office and you have a year and 30 days left on your term, that office becomes vacant, but you would continue to serve until your successor is qualified in an election or by appointment. But if you forfeit, then
You did something
you
for
did something,
cause.
and the charter says you forfeit, and so you
can't stay.
You don't continue to serve.
Okay, I understand. And were you already going to go past 5.03?
Did I skip it?
I don't know. I don't know if you were going to. Oh, yeah. We talked about that before the meeting, so it just may be interesting to the council that I don't have a problem with the length of our terms. I don't have a problem that we don't have term limits. I don't have a problem that we I don't have a problem with those things, but I didn't know if the council would want to discuss those things because it was discussed with the committee,
My
but
rec-
they didn't want to change anything. Was that it?
Is Dolph here? No.
I just
no.
wanted to make
Yeah.
sure it had been discussed, and I couldn't tell from these notes
It
that
wasn't
had been.
discussed. I wasn't asked to present anything on term limits.
Okay,
So-
so I didn't know if anybody on the council would be interested in discussing that. Like I said, leaving it the way it is fine with me, but I thought it should at least be brought up as a topic
Does anybody know how we?
by the commission or by us.
Does anybody know how we got the three-year terms? Why is that a thing? As opposed to 2 or 4 or whatever?
It's established in your charter. So it was 3-year terms when it was.
That was it?
If this hasn't been changed.
Right. Okay. And that's not. There's no state law about that, right?
Your terms can be between 2 and 4 years.
Okay.
2-year terms. Most larger cities have gone to 3-year terms, so you guys were a little ahead of the curve. But
Really?
a 3-year term has ramifications under the Constitution. Number one, it requires a majority vote. There is a requirement that if you announce for candidacy, as I just said, a candidacy for another office, and there's a year and 30 days left on your term, that's an automatic resignation. And there's also a requirement, and I did address it in the charter, all vacancies have to be filled within 120 days after the vacancy, and that's in those are constitutional requirements that come into play because of 3-year terms. So, judge of the election and runoff in 508. We've changed it. Currently, the runoff election in your charter has to be held not later than 30 days. State law says not earlier than 20 or later than 45. There was an issue with a couple elections where the Tarrant County runoff election day did not fall within your window, and so that caused a little bit of a problem, and so we thought changing it in accordance with state law instead of establishing a date by which the runoff had to be held. So, and
Mr. Mayor, Sorry to interrupt. We have at least one viewer at home. Dolph Johnson is not feeling well, but he's watching. He just let me know that the Charter Commission discussed term limits, but they made no recommendations to change. So I just want to clarify.
Thank you, Dolph.
I thought we did, but I couldn't recall, so I apologize. The next thing is vacancies, and this has to be compliant with the Constitution. The way it's currently written, it was not compliant. The election does have to be held within 120 days. In 2015, if you look at my comments, they amended the Constitution to allow for appointment if there is less than 12 months left on the term, and so, but that has to be in the charter. So,
Appointment by whom?
Pardon?
Appointment by whom?
By the city council.
I know another place it says the county judge. And the different thing about vacancies as well.
That's something we made up because, and this is something that people who are working on charters are starting to address. So, for the appointment in the event of a vacancy, and there's less than 12 months on the term, it's by a majority vote of the remaining council. So, and that is specified. 5.11 is different, and that's if we have a tornado and everybody's gone. This addresses a true crisis when you don't have a quorum. One of our cities actually had a recall many years ago, and a majority of the council was recalled, and they couldn't meet for like 6 months. And so this provides a way for city government to carry on in the event there is, and it's extraordinary circumstances this would only be if there's 6 or more vacancies and there's only one person, that one person isn't going to be able to make the appointment, and so that's only if there's only one person left, then the county judge can step in and say, just appoint somebody, and we think it would be given legal effect. It's never happened, but we just wanted to address that unfortunate circumstance.
Todd, I have a question on 5.09, which is just the single vacancy.
Mm-hmm.
Is okay, we've had vacancies since I've been on the council, and we have we had 2 at one time, or have we just had 1 vacancy at one time? And it hasn't been a problem to wait for the next election, and I personally think it would be better just to wait for the next election than to appoint somebody, because I think that gives the voters more of a say-so in who is on the council rather than 7 people. And I also think it can give what I would consider kind of an unfair advantage to the appointee. If the appointee did want to run again, it's kind of like, well, that's kind of a built-in advantage that 7 people gave that person. So that would be my only thought. I would not be, if the council chose to let that appointment be made, if the council wants to have that right to appoint, I'm not going to argue about it, but I thought we should think about that.
Well, I think we ought to leave it to where we have the option. Okay. We're an elected body by the citizens, and generally if we appoint somebody, it's short term anyway. Okay. And it can be just as much a disadvantage as an advantage to be an incumbent. If so, not necessarily a true advantage, and it would only be done if we needed to do it. If we said we couldn't do it, we take it to the voters now, then we would not have that option. If we leave it where we have that option, the voters are going to approve or disapprove, and that would leave it where we had that option as the elected officials to do what we're elected to do.
Have we, David, in your tenure on the council, have we ever appointed anyone?
Not that I'm aware of.
You can't.
Currently, we
with
cannot.
With the 3-year terms, unless you have this in your charter, you can't appoint.
So currently, we cannot anyhow.
You cannot appoint anybody. And so this allows you to do that even though you have 3-year terms. And the reason the legislature made this amendment and it was approved by the voters, because it's an amendment to the Constitution, is because the election has to be held within 120 days. So if you have an unexpected vacancy, a death or somebody moves out of the state, and there's 5 months left on the term, and the
It's an
election,
expensive election.
you have to hold that election in 120 days. So you'll have an election in March and in May. And so this was to allow some flexibility in the event there's a shorter window before, so you're not having 2 or 3 elections in 1 year.
Yeah, the most recent issues that we had has not happened before. John Ed Keeter passed away right after I got elected, and so that we had a vacancy of the mayor, and we had to have the election coming up for that. 2 of the council members chose to run for mayor. They resigned, so all of a sudden we're 3 down. We only had 4. So we were short for just a short period, and that would be a case where appointing someone in that position might not be a bad idea to keep from having to pay for that extra special election. Can we shut that door?
All right, Betsy, go ahead. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay,
Please.
510, this was just a suggestion I had, that the city council shall meet a minimum of 1 time per month and more as needed. I think the way that is drafted, I wanted to, well, let me read the council may by ordinance establish additional regular meetings and hold as many special meetings as necessary. There's certain actions that require action at a regular meeting, and if your charter just provides for 1 regular meeting per month, there might be some circumstance where, for example, establishing a TERS requires the vote to be at a regular meeting, and there are other items required by law, and this just gives you flexibility to establish by ordinance what dates your regular meetings will be held. So, and then 511 is what we were talking about a minute ago. If it falls below a quorum, so you can continue to meet, and it provides a mechanism to keep the government going.
Mr. Mayor, I have another question. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
So on 5.10, for the 2 meetings, so does that mean we need to pass an ordinance to allow that when you say by ordinance?
You have 2 meetings. How are your 2 meetings established now?
By the charter, I think.
An ordinance, I think is the question.
Your charter says the city council shall meet a minimum of 1 time per month. So I'm assuming you have an ordinance or something that established the meetings to be I don't know. I should have checked that.
Let's ask Dolph.
Yeah. and
You want to phone a friend?
Where too. Yeah.
Good. Fair enough. No, it's a good point. You're right. We probably have an ordinance now that states when we meet, and so this would supersede that. So, okay.
So this really shouldn't change anything. It's just clarifying how your meetings are established. So the next substantive thing, 603, to establish other administrative departments and distribute the work of divisions, and to abolish or consolidate departments and divisions. And then that was taken from the duties of the city council and moved to the city manager. And, when this was first drafted, you were a small city, and the council could, what I call micromanage or have more control over the actual running of the city. But as the city gets larger, and many of my cities, as they've gotten larger, choose to give that duty to the city manager just because it allows for flexibility and not the cumbersome vote of the council to organize the workings of the city. And if you don't like what the city manager's doing, you can tell him.
So I do have a comment here. I think that is the right thing to do, to allow the city manager to make these sorts of adjustments in the organization. But I do believe that the city council should retain approval of those types of departmental adjustments within the city, so that the city manager does bring those to city council, his recommendations for approval.
Mr.
Specifically,
Mayor.
what changes? I mean, are we talking about abolishing an entire department, or are you talking about just adding a personnel?
Yeah, I think this is more departmental, the way that I understand this. And I'll give you an example.
Okay.
The Economic Development Department of last year. If we decide to add another entire department, or if we decide to augment a department, split it in two, create essentially new cost centers, if you will, I think it's important that the council have some authority in that. We at least have approval.
Mr. Mayor, I had when I started last year, I had similar questions because I think this language, like Betsy mentioned, is a holdover from when the city was 5,000, far less employees. So the reality is anything that I would do outside of existing resources requires city council approval. So, for example, Laura's position earlier this year was approved by the city council. Probably anything new program-wise would run through the annual budget, which again requires city council majority approval. And so I think it's already in place through the budget and through,
I agree that it's in place in practice, but I would like to see it in concrete in our city's constitution.
How could we word that to make sure that councils wouldn't be able to, as they said, micromanage the city manager? How could we make that wording clear enough that what we're trying to convey is, departmental level type huge changes?
I think it's just subject to city council approval. Right now, the city manager doesn't even have the ability to do it the way our charter is written. So I think as long as we allow him the opportunity to structure the organization, he or she, to allow them the opportunity to structure the organization as they see fit, but bring that organizational structure to the city council for approval.
I'm not sure that the structure does need to be approved by the city council, because I think we're covering that in the budget when we approve the budget for those changes. Like, we could not have added the Economic Development Department if we did not approve of the budget for that department. That department would not have existed.
Yeah, the Economic Development Director was hired mid-year.
Right.
Before the budget.
Right.
So that occurred out of budget sequence. So what I'm saying is that in order for those things to occur, I think it's important that the council have approval of departmental changes, whether we're abolishing a department, adding a department, or we're augmenting a department. In augmenting a department, another example of that would be the IT department, where it was being funded from multiple sources at one point in time. Now it seems like it's going to be its own cost center. And I'm not real sure how that cost center is funded. And it really wasn't explained well during the budget process where those revenue streams would come from, whether that would be through property tax, whether that be through sales tax. So those are the things that I'm most concerned about, is what are the funding mechanisms? Because in our budget cycle, when we're approving the budget, we are talking about ad valorem taxes. Mm-hmm. Okay, but we have other revenues. So I want to make certain that we're talking about departmental adjustments that aren't just funded by property tax. They could be funded by other revenues. So just getting the understanding of how they're funded is an important part of the decision-making process in changing departmental structure. Where's the money coming from?
Mm-hmm. And I don't mean to put you on the spot, Gabe, but do you think prospective city managers that were applying for a city manager's position would feel that that was limiting their authority in something that they felt like they should have full authority in or not?
I think the charter currently reads like a city functions when it's general law. Is that a fair? And it's a holdover. So my opinion is that the city manager side of the fence, the staff side, is squarely the city manager's, and that a city manager wouldn't normally request council approval for things that are within current funding levels. If it's an addition, like the mid-year addition with economic development, took that to the city council approved that. But if you were to tell me, for example, I'll give you another example. I moved animal services from public works to community services just because I feel like some better synergy there. To ask council approval for a staffing decision, not something most city managers would. That's not the position, especially at a city of our size. Maybe back when, city of 5,000, but if that answers your question.
I will point out that with the general rule, as it was published in our charter, we had 11 respondents. Actually, we had over 40 respondents from city managers around the country, and 11 of them were shortlisted. So I don't see that as something that would prohibit us from having a good candidate list in the future.
Right, and I wasn't really thinking of it exactly in those terms, just a way of explaining my question. But I think if you hire a city manager, you put your faith in that person, and you feel like she can make those decisions and knows how his staff works and knows what's needed. And I feel personally that he or she should have that authority to do so, unless it's one of those budget things where it's not in the budget, mid-year thing.
Yeah, I think that's just something we'll have to disagree on.
Disagree, so
Yep.
I don't know if.
So the voters will decide.
What does anybody else, what does
we
anybody
have
else think about that? How we want to state this?
We have to decide how
Yeah.
we want to put it to the voters.
Want to go around, Cindy? What do you think?
I think that as long as, there's finances involved with it, that needs to come. But if it's, just like we were talking about with animal services, just a lateral change with, I don't think that needs to come to the city council.
Okay. Charlie, what do you think?
I agree with Cindy. As long as there's money involved in it, I think it should come before us for approval. But as a lateral change, that is his prerogative in the running of the city. And I think we should stand behind that.
Okay. Valerie?
One of the reasons we hired him was to make some decisions, so I think if it doesn't have a lot of financial, he can handle it.
Yep. Mr. Flory? I've heard.
Well, I tend to agree. We have control through budget, so I do think we're at a size now where we have a CEO running the city. He's not going to be able to form a new department without it having a budget. So even if it is mid-year, there was still dollars in there for a position. And that so I don't have a problem with it being worded like this.
And I don't disagree with Patrick at all, actually. My concern is how we would word it. I don't want to potentially cut the legs off a city manager in that way. The dollar piece makes sense. It's just what do we want to state this? Because I'm very careful how anything we state in here is in concrete, really. So that's why I'm concerned about taking away or giving.
If we have moved the
powers.
duties of the city manager with the department subject to budget funding approval by the city council, then that says you're going to approve it. Does that do what we're trying to do?
So I just want to point out that at the mid-year, when the position was introduced, the Economic Development Department budget was $45,000 or somewhere in that range. That was not enough money to cover the salary of the Economic Development Director at that point in time, and I don't remember that there was an actual adjustment in fund request at the time that position was presented to the council. So there was not a budgetary adjustment presented. There was simply a staff adjustment presented, is what I'm getting at. If they want to add in mid-year a budgetary adjustment line item where, yes, we're going to add somebody, but that cost is going to be X number of dollars increase to the budget, I'm fine with that. But I don't want to see a director-level position come in as a recommendation without a dollar amount associated with it. Does that make sense?
I recall that we did discuss this position a long while back. It's just that we had it lumped into one person, knowing that at some point we were going to need to separate that out. And I think Kim just corrected us that there was a mid-year budget number.
There was a mid-year budget adjustment for it. There wasn't a full-year funding because you approved it in February or March, so it was for the remainder of that fiscal year, and then you approved the full funding as part of the budget process.
Okay, so when the position was presented, we did make an adjustment to the economic
Yes,
development line item?
There was a mid-year budget adjustment made to fund that portion of the salary for that remainder of the fiscal year.
Okay.
You know, while I'm thinking too, we did make some other mid-year staffing changes. We moved a part-time records clerk in the police department to full-time. We added a dispatcher. Again, if we're increasing an FTE count, it requires city council approval, and there's a budgetary impact. How we reconcile that is usually through a mid-year budget amendment. But, you know, to answer your question, would I ask the city council for approval to arrange the city as I see fit? I would say no, because that's what you, by virtue of hiring me, have asked me to do, is organizationally set things to accomplish your goals, if that provides some clarity.
It does, but again, moving from $45,000 at mid-year to $300,000 at budget time, that's a pretty big jump in one line item. So I'm suggesting that if we're going to make a recommendation to adjust a department, it would be good to know what the departmental impact cost would be for an entire year. Because if you're going to come to us 2 months before the end of the fiscal year, and you say that the department's going to cost us $30,000, when in actuality the department will cost us $300,000 in the next year, it would be good to know that information up front, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, but that's not all salary.
Isn't
that
completely understood. That information was not disclosed at the time the position was presented and the department was presented.
Did we not adjust the buckets? The money was
And let's not dig into this
Yeah.
specific situation. This is really not fair. This is a big top-level discussion, so let's try to keep it there at the top level, what we want to put in the charter. That's the big question. You know, what we've done in the past, let's say what wording we want to have in the charter. That's really what we need to, concern ourselves with here. So we've got some ideas on the board, talking about transferring this entirely to the city manager or leaving something that says if it's got financial impact, it's got city council approval, or some kind of caveat along those lines. What do we want to, as a council, what do we want to put in here?
Is the intent, as we go through tonight, nailing down everything on this so that we can bring it to the citizens in the election, or is this a discussion tonight to tweak and come back later and approve? That's what I'm trying to figure out. If we need to nail that exact wording of that sentence down right now, then we do. If we don't, can the attorney give us some suggestions listening to what we're saying here?
Well, what you're talking about is a policy issue, so I'm going to let you decide that. But as soon as we can decide on the wording would be best. We've got to call the election in 6 weeks. I need to be able to draft the propositions, and
So we need to nail that down
between
now.
now and then is not
Okay.
a real problem, but as much as we can get done would be good. Not to write. If you want to have another meeting, I am totally fine with that too. But,
I would rather get it done now, but I'm just asking if that's what the intent is so that we can bring it to the citizens. So,
Yeah, and also the bigger question is what we haven't discussed is what are we going to bring to the citizens? The entire charter, pieces of the charter, how's that going to work? And what is appropriate to bring to the citizens in this election?
well, I think the original charter was approved. So what I envision what we're bringing to the citizens is just an updated version
You'll
of
have-
the charter. So that's all we're asking them to approve is the
right,
updated.
we're not. we're not going to ask them to weigh in on the whole charter. They're just going to be weighing in on individual propositions that will address one topic at a time, and they'll be drafted. So there are not that many changes proposed, but we've got to be very careful that if one proposition passes and another one doesn't, that we haven't created a conflict. So I need to be very careful in drafting those
Well,
propositions.
and will we give them 20? However, whatever the number of changes is, or will we limit that? What do people typically do, and what legally should we do?
When I draft propositions, I usually do it by topic, and I don't think there are any in here that will matter, but a lot of times you have to make sure that you have in one proposition all the items that are going to be impacted by the passage or failure of that proposition. So I haven't done it, but and actually there's been some recent case law too that I think requires more detailed and specificity in each proposition. So they won't be nebulous. The voters will know what they're voting on, but there'll probably be 12 propositions, I would guess, and each addressing a topic. There won't be one for each specific section, although I have seen some other cities, I think, that have, every time there's a word change, there's a proposition, and that is really confusing, and that can create chaos if you have different ones pass and different ones fail. But, for example, we'll have one that says elections, and then everything related to elections will be in that proposition.
Okay. I guess my concern is 12 too many or 15 too many to put out to the voters at one time, or is there any limit?
There's no
The
limit.
limits to the attention span.
That's sort of where I'm going here. Yeah.
I mean,
You
that's
put 20
that's
on
the
there, you're
reality.
gonna lose people.
Yeah. I will, so what Chapter 9 governs charters, adoption and amendment of charters, it says each proposition shall contain one topic. I read that to mean elections or city council or, but always if there is
operations
a
or-
hot topic item, for example, going from 2-year to 3-year terms, if you're doing that, that would be its own proposition.
Yeah, when we have one that says Article 10, Article 9, or well, not article, but whatever that article's called, that would be its own proposition. Is that how you would break it up typically?
It'll be by topic, and it may fall into that framework, but it'll be elections, or it'll be city council, it'll be city manager. Right. I will try to have as few propositions as possible, but if there's a hot topic one, that will be by itself. And I really haven't looked at it to see, but you're going to be able to approve the propositions too. So,
So this one particular item affects 6.3, 6.5, and 7.1. It's repeated 3 times. So this hits 3 different areas.
right. And you know what, I was just looking at this and I noticed that it's addressed twice, and probably we could delete.
Yeah, I think I would suggest we
Depart-
delete it in 2 areas.
Delete,
and
I think we can delete 701, and that's actually the entirety of Article 7.
Yeah, that's Article 7
Yeah.
is the departments.
Yeah. And-
I mean, that's one way to narrow this down so that we're not hitting
Right.
the same subject over and over again.
It would just be one proposition in any event. You're not going to have one proposition for the amendment of 701, one proposition for the amendment of 6.032. It'll be one proposition. Shall the Home Rule Charter of the City of Saginaw be amended to provide that the city manager has authority over departmental changes by revising Section 6.032, deleting 7.01, and revising whatever it was in duties of city council. So all 3 of those items would be in one proposition.
And just to clarify, once we have this in an election, and correct me if I'm wrong, we can't have another election on this charter for another 2 years.
2 years.
So we need to get it all taken care of at one
Yeah.
time.
Do it right.
Well, we've made it since 1985 too, so
Well, that's true.
I doubt we're going to come back in 2 years and want to change it.
But I don't want to do half of them now and think we can do half of them in another year.
No, we have to do it all at once.
Right.
So I just want to make sure that I'm clear when I'm saying tying this to just the budget item or operating within the fiscal year's budget constraints, as we're talking about. If a department change is presented mid-year, so long as the department change is presented in a full year cost, full year budget cost, so that when we're seeing the dollar amounts that are being presented, we're not seeing dollar amounts that are just 2 months worth of operating cost, and we're making a decision based upon what we know to be a full year's exposure, whether it be salary, whether it be vehicles, doesn't matter what it is. Whatever that total cost of that department change will be for a full budget year is what I'm looking for. And that's what I'm getting at. Does that make sense?
It does. It makes sense, but I don't think we need to put that in the charter. I just think those are questions that the council needs to ask the city manager.
So the suggestion, let me understand what I'm hearing then. What I'm hearing is that if there is a mid-year adjustment that's presented that includes a departmental change, and the departmental change provides cost forecast or cost information for a partial year, we're counting on future councils to know that they need to be asking for a full year cost exposure.
Mr. Mayor? The enhancement, any change to the action you take would come through the budget process for the following fiscal year. So we added a position this in FY18. We added recurring budget in FY19 for that program as a budget request, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the mid-year budget adjustment was less than 20% of what the actual budget proposal cost was for fiscal year 19. So what I'm saying is, at mid-year, we were told this departmental change will cost $30,000. At budget time, we were told it will cost $300,000. So what I want to make sure of is that we are being told what the full exposure for a budget year will be when it's presented.
And I'm with you. Your numbers don't add up to me, but
One of the things
I understand. I understand where
I'm
you're coming
perfectly
from.
happy diving into details, but as the mayor has
Sure.
suggested,
We'll
I'm
keep moving.
perfectly happy diving into those details with you.
We're already diving into details. So let's talk about what we want this to say. What would we like to say on this? And Cindy, I don't want to cut you off. Let's talk about what this. So we're still at 6.03, correct?
Well, actually, if we're moving it to the city manager, we're at 6.0510.
6.05.10. Okay? I got you. So we move it there with a statement. What does that statement want to say? That he currently says to establish other administrative departments and distribute the work divisions and to abolish or consolidate departments and divisions. So that's what it says now. What would we like to amend that, change that to make it more palatable to the council? I think we want to add some kind of financial statement. I'm not sure exactly what we want to say. With something like with any financial impact will be approved by the council in the budget process or something. I don't know. Go ahead, Betsy.
Just put, provided funding is available in the approved budget.
That makes sense. What does anybody else think? Mary?
And then if funding was not available, then it would come before the council for approval?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That sounds good.
All right. Betsy, keep going.
Okay, I'm making notes, so I don't.
Oh, sorry. I don't want to
That's
rush
okay.
you. I'm sorry.
You don't want me to start looking at this 2 weeks from now and try to remember what happened.
I got video for you, though. And we got Dolph as a witness.
Okay.
Can I ask a dumb question about 6.06?
Yeah.
The appointment and removal of the city secretary. The mayor shall appoint the city secretary. Whoa, whoa, whoa! What? I know Janice wouldn't like that. What does this mean?
We talked about that in the commission, and I just made a suggestion it be changed to the city council, but they didn't want to change it. But
Well, currently in practice, you would bring if we got a new city secretary, you would bring the city secretary to the council, and we would approve that, right? That's how it would work in practice today.
That'd be my interpretation. So, give you an example in Sugar Land, the city secretary there was under the management purview of the city manager, but any action the city secretary required council approval, similar to a city attorney function.
Because per the charter, the organizational structure, Janice reports to us, not to you, right?
Yeah,
That's how it works.
That's correct.
Per the organizational structure, official structure, city secretary reports to us. So yeah, it's an odd situation. Is this clear enough? I mean, it still says mayor.
the way it's currently worded, as I noted, that is more common in strong mayor cities, that the mayor would have that authority to make the initial appointment and then bring it to the council for approval. I raised that to the commission, and they didn't see a reason for a change. But if you see a reason for a change, this is the time to do it.
I would be happy with the saying city council. It
I
should not
agree.
be on the mayor.
I agree with
I
that.
agree.
Yeah.
If it's brought to the council, then the council approves it, great, but not just the mayor. I don't think that's fair. I don't want to lose Janice, just be all clear on that. I'm just this is just her position is a unique position. So,
But I have a question.
oh, Mary, go ahead.
So if we leave it pretty much like it is, it's the city council instead of the mayor? Is that what
Currently,
is that
the
what you're
mayor
asking?
appoints, I don't know if this is what happens in practice, but the mayor appoints the city secretary, and then the city secretary becomes the city secretary once the council votes. If we change that, it would just be the city council shall appoint the city secretary.
So my question is, let's say Janice left. We would never ask her to leave, but let's say she decided to leave. So now Gabe needs a new city secretary. Well, he works very closely with the city secretary. And did you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, and again, in Sugar Land, the way it worked, the city secretary was an employee of the council and required council approval, also the city attorney. But the management functions were through the city manager. So the city manager did the recruitment and
The city manager
recommended to the
recommended.
council this person.
And it
Well,
would be
that's-
mostly like just a,
It's more of a procedural thing.
right.
Right.
So
I didn't
it doesn't
want
mean
us-
that couldn't occur with the way it's worded. It just means the ultimate hiring is by the city council.
Right.
I just didn't want us to be in a position of having to be the people who chose that person.
In most cities, the city count, many cities, the three appointees, or sometimes four, would be the city manager, the city secretary, and the city attorney. And of course, the city judge has to be appointed. So, and yours is a little bit different because it has the city secretary and assistant city secretaries have to have the approval of the council. Usually, the assistant city secretaries would be hired by the city manager or, with input from the city secretary, but the only appointee of the city council would be the city secretary. So
Do
that
we
one
even
needs to
have
be
assistants?
considered.
So why couldn't we just strike that part of the statement? Strike where it says, "and such assistant city manager."
Yeah,
City secretaries.
I would suggest we strike that.
And I just was trying to clarify in how we went through this long process to hire Gabe, and we actually interviewed him. I mean, would Gabe be actually doing the interviewing for the city secretary, or would we? That's what I'm trying to, or would we
It wouldn't
just
be near as elaborate.
Pardon
It
me?
wouldn't be near as elaborate. The position's not quite as much as hiring the CEO.
Right. It just seems like the city manager should be able to hire that person, and then we would just
Approve the hire.
approve it.
That's-
I don't know how you have to word that, but
So what you're wanting is the city council shall appoint the city secretary?
As deemed.
What does appoint mean legally?
Pardon me?
What does appoint mean from a legal perspective?
You vote to appoint.
Okay, so vote, appoint means voting, okay. I'm good with that, if the city council votes to.
Well, I can recall at least 3 city secretaries since I've been on the council, and I don't 2. Okay. There was the third. I remember a third. But we never interviewed them. We allowed the city manager to pick that, and we formally approved. It just gives you, if you don't want that person, you can say no.
So by appointing, we're saying approval, and that's, I'm
Yes,
fine with that.
yeah.
That's, the city council approves it, or appoints it, that's fine.
And how that person gets before you is your decision. If you say, city manager, bring me a candidate that you like, and then you would vote on that person, or you
okay.
could interview, as you said.
All right, that sounds good.
So I'm just going to say the city council shall appoint the city secretary.
And strike,
And I'll revise this,
and you're going to strike the assistant part as well?
the assistant
Okay.
part. Uh-huh.
That sounds good. Everybody good with that?
Sounds good.
Excellent.
Make it simple.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, before we move too far along, under 6.03, item 4, I do want to address that.
He has a whole one?
Yes, I would like to differentiate inquire and investigation. The two words are not the same. To be able to ask a question versus a formal investigation, I can certainly understand that we would want the council as a whole to initiate an investigation, but I don't think that the council as a whole should be needed to ask simple questions. So the inquire into, I don't believe, should be an as a whole. To investigate, I can certainly appreciate an as a whole statement.
Now, this is meant to be a clarification of the current authority of the council. It's not a change. I mean, because the council acts as a whole. Individual council members, I mean, you can go to your city manager and inquire as to the conduct, and I don't think you need specific charter authority to do that. But
I do not like inquire being in this as a whole.
What does inquire mean legally?
it would be to,
Ask a question.
well, ask a question, yeah. Or to,
What I'm saying is, I appreciate investigation. An investigation, what I'm not appreciating here is if we have to have a council majority to inquire or ask a question of the city manager, specific details of an issue, and it's now charter that says that. I'm not on board with that.
Can we change the word inquire to investigate? Would that satisfy?
to conduct an investigation?
I think conducting an investigation is probably a much more formal statement, and I think that the spirit should be that an individual council person should have the authority and ability to ask questions and expect answers
Of the city manager, but not.
of the city manager.
Of the city manager, but not, because there's a prohibition in the charter that.
No doubt about it. Understood.
Of going to individual employees or department heads.
Right, we
Certainly.
work through the city council, that's our role, that's how we do it, yeah.
City manager.
Okay.
City manager, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Somebody was listening.
it's already listed, there's another page where, yeah. Let's keep moving.
I'm moving. Municipal court is just a cleanup to make it compliant with state law. You have a municipal court of record. Your judge must be an attorney and is an attorney. So you're following this in practice. We just need to make the charter match that. And also, there are certain authorities given to the mayor that I think can
The oath of
are
office.
better removed. I mean, the
Yeah, the
judge
oath
needs to be
thing.
acting as judge.
Right.
The mayor doesn't need to be acting as judge.
Right.
That's a holdover from when the city was much smaller.
Right. I had a question on a different one. You had a question on 608. Go.
Actually, we skipped 607.
Oh, did we? Sorry.
Oh, convenient.
Oh, yeah. This was just a clarification because, I mean, ethically, that is what would happen. I mean, if one of you gets a traffic ticket, you're not going to be coming to Bryn to help you with that. We represent you in your official capacity, not in any other capacity. And we just want to clarify in the charter that we are not mandated to represent you all personally.
And my question on that section is this specific to in-house attorney or just attorney, and how is that defined? It doesn't say that, but we don't have an in-house attorney. We contract out for that. So how is that?
It would be an in-house attorney or TOS
This
or
is
anybody else.
this is broad enough for either one.
Oh, absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah,
Okay.
in-house, TOS, if you want to appoint a special counsel to handle a matter other than Bryn or TOS, you hire and fire an attorney.
So my only concern with this is that there is kind of a gray area between official and unofficial capacity, especially in matters of development consideration, where an individual council member could be personally liable for a decision. And we as individual council members count on the advice of the city attorney to understand when we are venturing into the territory
It
of.
relates to your individual capacity. That relates to your official capacity, whether or not you have a conflict of interest.
Okay.
Is part of your official capacity, and that's our job as city attorneys to help you with that. I mean, there's sometimes when it does cross the line, it becomes more of a personal matter than an official matter. But you trust us to know.
So I just want to make sure that gray area is not. I want to make sure that's bridged, because there is a point in time in which we are counting on the city attorney to counsel us to such point that we need to engage our own counsel.
Absolutely, and we will always tell you, and I'm sure Bryn will always tell you too, when it's time to hire your own attorney when he can no longer represent you.
And until such time that he does or the city attorney declares you must engage your own counsel, then the city attorney is acting as counsel?
Not, we're talking in abstractions here, but I think, but
Brown v. Cinemark.
yeah,
You're familiar with that case?
no.
Okay, so when a council person is challenging a developer on a particular situation, planning and zoning makes a recommendation, okay? And that council person disagrees with planning and zoning and wants to vote against planning and zoning's recommendation.
That's in your official capacity, and right.
But we are counting on the attorney to tell us you are now venturing into territory where you
have a
could be
conflict.
personally liable.
Yep.
And at that point, are we waiting on the city attorney to say you need to engage your own attorney before you vote or before you sit in council
I don't think
chamber?
the city attorney has to use those magic words, but the city attorney would advise you if you do have a conflict, and that would be. And
So I guess the gray area to me is what's official capacity and not official capacity in that case. I mean, we don't get to flip the switch between executive session and setting in here and taking official action
well,
and
for
expose.
example, let me think of an example. So in executive session, we're in executive session, and that the city attorney says, now, You have a fiduciary duty to the city. What you're hearing here is confidential. It's not a crime if you go out and repeat this or talk to a developer or do whatever. It's not a crime. But you could have you have a fiduciary duty to the city, and if you cause harm to the city, you could have liability to the city for any damage that was done. So the city attorney has a duty to say you have a fiduciary duty. If you do this act and it causes the city harm, you could have liability. At that point, a council member decides, well, it's important enough to me, I'm going to go talk about this, incurs liability. At that point, that council member is not acting in his official capacity, and you would have to get your own attorney, whether or not the city attorney tells you to do so. That city attorney, once you have committed an act that is ultra-virus or outside of your duties, then the city attorney no longer would represent you.
Yeah, I guess what I'm reflecting on are ministerial duties versus our voting duties. So when we are acting in a ministerial function, but we have discovered information between the time in which, say, planning and zoning has made their recommendation to council, we are now in an administrative role, more of a ministerial role to vote in favor of the recommendation. I'm concerned about that gray area. We had this particular issue come up with the charter school, very particular issue. Mm-hmm. And we had a ministerial obligation to uphold planning and zoning, and if we voted against planning and zoning as individual council members, we were putting ourselves in a position of individual liability. So I'm seeing a very slippery slope there, and that particular
If you commit an act.
So I guess my question is what constitutes good faith or bad faith in this case? Because stepping outside of official capacity mm-hmm. is committing an act of bad faith. And at what point in time do we lose our representation
it's
from?
It's going to be fact-based. Each individual circumstance is going to be fact-based. And it's going to be difficult. There's no way to pin down in your charter what that means. In your official capacity is going to be individually fact-determined given each situation.
Okay, but it's the official capacity and the loss of the official capacity that I just want to have an understanding of what constitutes that change.
What this really means, I mean, if it's related to your service as a council member, you're going to be in your official capacity unless you break a law. If you break a law, then that's ultra-virus, and the council and the city attorney will not provide representation. If the city attorney has a conflict, the city attorney won't provide representation.
So I am personally sued by the legal counsel of the developer, and I acted in my official capacity, and I did not act in bad faith.
It doesn't matter if you acted in bad faith or not. The city attorney or TML most likely will represent you if it has to do with a vote.
Okay. That's what I want to be clear on. So it doesn't matter if you act in bad faith or not, even if it's a ministerial function and you're exposing yourself to personal liability.
Unless you break a law. And then
Okay.
that's going to be, and what this means really is if you get a traffic ticket, the city attorney's not going to represent you.
I totally understand that.
But whether or not, in any event, if you're sued, most likely it will not be Toast that's representing you. It's going to be TML because you have insurance coverage.
We do not.
You don't have TML.
No. We as individual council members do not have insurance coverage for legal protection.
In your official capacity, you do.
Yeah, the city does have coverage.
We have insurance through the Texas Municipal Risk Pool.
So in the event I want to be clear about this because Bren's counsel, at the time of this, that when this was going on, Bren's counsel was we were taking on individual liability that would not be covered.
And that is possible.
It would have to have been a specific item he was discussing.
Yeah, I wasn't
I don't
there,
think it was
so I
the
don't know
general-
what exactly his advice was based on. So.
So I just, this is a,
If a council person does a bad act in contravention of the law and incurs personal liability, it's possible that we as city attorney could not represent you, or each situation is going to be fact determinant, though.
okay.
Possibly, Patrick, maybe, I seem to recall that when we were talking about the vote, and he being Bren, advised us that if we voted against allowing someone that meets the zoning requirements by law.
And I remember, yeah, it was P&Z, the final plat approval for P&Z is per state law is the final step. City council approval it's not needed. And so we voted, the concern was voting against it. And that was and Bren went through that. We had executive session, we talked about, yeah.
So if they're allowed by rights or by law and you vote against it, then you may open yourself up to some personal liability. That's what I'm trying to remember is where that came from.
I guess I don't understand how that is germane to this 6.07 and what specifically we would need to adjust to make that clear.
Just omit their official capacity. Why not leave it the same?
This is very common language in charters. I mean, what this means is if you go out and rob a bank, we're not going to represent you. And we have no duty under the terms of the charter to represent you. So, but if it's related to if it's related to the city business or your conduct, and you have then as a council person, then either we would represent you, TML would represent you, or a determination would be made that no coverage is available, dependent on the circumstances.
My only heartburn about it is I don't know that there is a line in which we can say we're acting officially or unofficially in the capacity of a city council person. I mean, I understand we can break laws, and I don't see it practical for me to pick up the phone and say I need the city attorney to represent me in a traffic ticket. What I'm concerned about is that in the normal progress of our volunteer duties, sitting here at this dais, that we could expose ourselves to personal liability. And while we can expose ourselves to personal liability, the expectation is that until such time that we know from the city attorney that we are moving from city attorney protection to other protection needs, that needs to be clearly delineated in my mind. And I don't know that adding this language in there helps that.
Does state law not tell us when we're not in official capacity?
But it's going to be fact determinant. I mean,
Yes. So I mean, it's going to it has to be proven one way or the other. It's kind of a black line there. You either are or you're not in official capacity.
And I don't think this charter is intended to outline every possible situation that could occur. It's just a blanket statement.
It's less of a blanket here, though. We're adding language which narrows the scope. I mean, we're narrowing scope here. We're not increasing the scope.
But does state law not allow the attorney to cover us if we're not in official capacity anyway?
Yeah, I mean, really, this is clarifying. It's clarifying language. It's not changing anything. It's just clarifying that we represent you in your role as council members. We represent, staff in their role as city manager, city secretary. And if you're in that role, it's our job to give you advice. If we see there's a conflict, we will advise you. You might have a conflict here. You need to make a determination whether or not you do have a conflict. So, and whether or not there is a defense provided is going to be it's going to be determined whether or not your actions were ultra-virus, which means outside of the scope of your duties as a council person.
I understand that. Just clarifying language, in my mind, narrows the scope. And I want to be clear as to when we're operating in official capacity and when we're not operating in official capacity. If that's a fact-based decision, at what point in time is the fact determined?
It's going to be individually determined for each scenario.
Okay, moving on. We are way behind schedule, folks, so let's keep going. And just point of order, we're at 7:20. Do we want to continue this discussion? I don't know how much longer we'll take. Just what does everybody think? Keep it going? Let's keep going then. Okay.
Where are we? Public utilities is just, it's more, the language is more modern.
I'm sorry, we're going to strike Article 7,
Oh, yeah. It's repetitive.
so we're going to strike it.
Right.
Will that mean 8 moves to 7?
Pardon me?
Will that mean that we just move everything up?
I think I think it'd be easier just to put reserved under
Okay.
Article 7.
But will we need to explain the reason why we're doing that is just to remove repetitive?
The proposition will, remember, it'll be just one proposition.
Yeah.
Right, and we don't have to explain it, but the proposition will state and delete section 7.01 and label it reserved.
Okay, yeah,
Uh-huh.
that's an explanation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The propositions will be very clear
Okay.
what's happening to each section.
Okay, thank you.
So utilities, basically, this is more modern language. It gives the city specific rights. For example, in 807, the new 807, whether or not it's stated in the franchise agreement, the city, the franchise is going to be subject to all of these requirements. It does change. Your current Section 905 has a 25-year limit for franchises. The language that I took, this is actually from Burleson's. We worked on it several years ago, but a franchise shall not be granted for an indeterminate period of time, nor for a term of more than 20 years. So that's a change from what you currently have. A lot of this authority is has been superseded or overshadowed by state and federal law, but I see no reason to limit your authority in granting franchises. If the state or feds want to come in and limit that authority, so be it. But I think we should, my opinion, state as strongly as possible the authority that we have over our franchisees, and that's what this does. And I don't need to go over every section unless you want me to. Personal services,
Yeah, I was going to ask about that,
we
just to explain.
we talked about this, and actually I was not at the meeting where it was discussed. Alicia was there. Oh. We didn't, to be honest, we didn't know what personal services means. And the commission, though, chose to leave it, and I wasn't there, so I cannot explain why. But I just highlighted it because we weren't quite sure what the point was.
Just guessing, but I assume the commission thought it meant that we could contract with someone for our own personal business, like a fence or something. But I don't think we should be able to do that. Mm-mm. But if you we would never. I guess they wanted to make sure we would never think we had the right to do that. I guess.
That's not quite what it says. It's personal services.
Yeah, I don't know what personal services
We
is.
didn't either.
So if you deleted it, would that solve the problem because it wouldn't even be talked about?
Yeah.
If nobody even knows what personal services means, maybe it shouldn't be in there. I mean, what's your professional opinion?
I wasn't at, I'm sorry, I can't help much with this one because I was not at that meeting, but for personal services,
I don't know. It sounds like Dolph didn't have any comments on that. I don't know if that's holdover language from 30 years ago.
Can we just strike that whole number? Yeah, strike A completely then? Any reason to keep it?
we're talking about A, not B.
Well, I guess
Yeah.
the whole section then. I mean, do we? Yeah. Yeah, we call it personal services, but B talks about the city manager services as well in contracts. So,
Your commission chairman might have some input on what was meant by this.
Ed Larson.
'Cause
Well, to keep things going, I guess it wouldn't hurt to keep it in there. I think what the commission probably thought was just to make sure we knew we weren't allowed to use city equipment or anything like that, or the people that work for the city use them with no charge for our own personal use. I guess that's what it means. I don't guess it
maybe
would
that
hurt
is
to
what
leave it
means,
in
but
there.
Personal services, I mean,
Well, it's not going to hurt anything to leave it.
yeah.
Right?
Maybe they mean like if my driveway, and I say, well, can you just come fix this little driveway, whatever, something like that, you know what I mean? Personal services.
Maybe, okay, okay. Competitive bidding in 904,
But-
all purchases,
Sorry, before we move on, though, 902B, what's the reasoning to move from 3 to 5 years?
I wasn't at that meeting, so I didn't hear the commission's reasoning.
I
That
don't-
that was the commission's reasoning.
Yeah, I don't see a reason that we should extend that. I mean, it essentially exposes us to 2 additional years of a potential buyout, where if somebody's agreement is not up for 5 years versus 3, we would have to buy them out of 2 additional years, whoever that might be.
but it does say no longer than, so you could be much shorter than if you wanted to. But it's really a contractual thing, contractual.
That's back to my question of why change it from 3 to 5 years? I think it should stay the same. So- But you can still renew their contract in 3 years. What I'm saying is I don't understand why why we're lengthening the interval.
And there's no legal reason for that. There's nothing.
Yeah.
Bet you there's nothing legal that would.
It was just a recommendation of the commission.
Okay. I'm fine leaving it at 3 if we want to do. Fair enough.
So you want to leave it at 3?
Yeah.
Okay. Competitive bidding, this is tracking language from 20 years ago. It's so much simpler to say all purchases must be made in compliance with state law and state bidding requirements. You don't want to put in extra requirements because you're going to be making your staff comply with both.
Sounds
And
good.
then 905 is covered in the previous franchise section. In 10.01, you have detailed requirements for eminent domain procedures that are archaic and really need to be deleted. And so that's why all of 1001 is deleted after B. in,
Are you on the 1002 or are you still on 1001?
I'm passing through 1002.
I have a question about 1002.
Okay.
Does this prohibit us from forming an economic development corporation and owning property, real estate that way?
Where are you? Where are you?
I'm at 1002, section 10.02, real estate, owned by the city.
No.
Okay. That's what I was hoping the answer was. I just want to make sure.
Yeah, I mean, this just means that the heading is really, this is basically saying when this charter is adopted, everything stays the same.
Okay.
So, but it wouldn't address property owned by the EDC. It says all property owned by the city stays with the city.
Mm-hmm.
The EDC, of course, is going to be a
Separate entity.
instrumentality of the city and a separate corporation, and so it has nothing to do with this.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Okay.
But one thing I do want to clarify is under powers of the city, this was 4.1, we do have sale, lease, and management and control of city property, but it looks like 1002 limits that to public use or trust for the public.
Let's look at it.
So that's about two-thirds of the way down. What I want to be careful of is that we may have an interest to land lease for private use, and I don't want to block us from that opportunity.
This section is referencing property now owned or controlled by the city shall vest in and remain and be property of the city under this charter. So
And just to clarify,
this is just clarifying that property owned and controlled and contracts entered into at the time this charter was adopted will stay property of the city. But I don't think it is limiting the city's ability to engage in activity that would be commercial in nature.
So if we own property currently today, and we want to use that property for private use in land lease, this does not limit us by virtue of the fact that it says public uses?
No, because I would read this to mean now owned is when this provision went into effect, not today.
You mean 1980, whatever?
Right.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that actually prompts another question. So all properties purchased after the adoption of this would not fall under this rule? Once reaffirmed by the city, by the voters?
It's not going to be reaffirmed by the voters. We're not changing this section.
Okay, so is it not in force and effect for all properties purchased after 1988?
This section really doesn't add authority to the city at all. I mean,
I'm just concerned it might limit.
This is a question kind of, but in all property of whatsoever character or description which may have been held and is now held, controlled, or used by the city for public purposes or in trust for the public shall vest in and remain and inure to the city under this charter and all contract suits and pending actions. It doesn't change the character of anything.
That'd be more of a use question, wouldn't it?
Yeah. And
I mean,
it
whether
doesn't
it's
limit
private
your
or-
authority to hold property in other manners.
So if we decide to retain the property, for example, we decide to retain a piece of dirt, real estate, and then we want that piece of real estate that we retain, we own the property, to perform in a private function.
This would not limit.
It does not limit that.
No. 12, which one are we missing? For budget, 1202.
Just real quick, 1101, you said added inalienable. What does that mean legally?
That's a word we started using when the legislature started taking away our rights over our streets. And whether or not it's going to be given effect by the courts, we like to put it in there. It's inalienable. It's ours. Legislature, you can't tell us that we have to put those small cell towers on our light things. That's what we're trying to do. Whether or not it's going to be given effect or not, I don't know. But we're just trying to retain as much power as we can with the legislature and trying to eat away at our rights of our streets.
Amen. Thank you.
So whether or not it's going to do any good or not, it's in there. So for budgets, what I usually suggest, and some cities don't mind having extra public hearings, but it's so much easier for the charter to not be specific as to timeframes for budget hearings or other types of hearings or notice that's required, because they are basically tracking law that was in place back when the charter was adopted, and it's so much easier just to say in accordance with state law, because if you try tracking state law is going to change, and you're going to have to fit the requirements of state law into the additional requirements of your charter. And so that's why throughout here, in 1202 and 1203, we just said in accordance with state law. Also, I mean, this was a recommendation by the commission, but your charter requires a favorable vote of at least 4 out of the 7 members of the council. So if you have, if you have a quorum, if we only had 6,
if
you
we
only
couldn't
have
pass
6
it.
here, and it passes, or if you only have 5, and so the
couldn't.
budget passes by 3, that would be in violation of your charter as currently drafted. The commission recommended deleting that. That is a decision for you guys to make whether or not you want to leave that in. It's not a requirement of state law. It's a requirement of your charter.
So I just have one comment about that. If we are going to go to state law, I mean, obviously, once truth in taxation is triggered, we have the meetings established for us and our hearings established for us. So my only concern about not requiring a 4/7 vote on amounts asked or tax increases asked that are within the truth in taxation, bracket, I would like to see 7 members of the council present for that vote. I mean, it should not be that we allow 1 or 2 members to just be absent because it's a difficult vote. It's important that if we're going to raise taxes for our citizens, that all 7 members be here to vote.
How about all members? What if we don't have 7? What if somebody's resigned or moved or something right before that?
Or you have a reason you can't have 7 there, then you couldn't conduct business without approving it.
And the problem there is you have time constraints in which you have to adopt a budget. And if you require 7 to be there and somebody
can't be,
then you're going to have a problem with your charter in adopting a budget.
I would hope that we're all committed enough that we're going to be available, if at all possible, for important issues like that. That's the way I felt for the years I've been on council. I've never skipped a meeting because I didn't want to vote on something, and I've only missed meetings because I had reason I couldn't be here.
So I just don't want to set it up to where 4 people can show up and make that decision. which we are doing that if we're just saying a quorum. Right now, the charter says that all 7 of us have to be here. Is that right?
What it means is it has to be approved by, what this says is, it doesn't say all 7 have to be there. It says at least 4 people have to vote in favor of it. So if you have a quorum of 5, the majority would be 3. And under the term, you would have to have 4 out of those 5 vote if you only had 5 people present under the terms of the charter.
Okay, so if 4 people are present, 3 of them vote for the tax increase, then it passes.
It would pass under state law. Under your charter, it would not.
I really don't like the idea of 3 people increasing taxes. So
It's not necessarily increasing taxes. You're passing a budget. You don't know what the tax could not change. We don't know.
yeah, just to restate what I said, though, that is when TNT is triggered, when we are increasing taxes, when we know that we're triggering truth in taxation law, and we have to go through our hearings, I think it is important that we have 4 people vote in favor.
I think in the history I've been here, it's kicked in every year. So, I mean, it pretty much kicks in every year unless we have a depression where the value of property goes down.
Because my biggest concern is that state law is going to change. We know it is. We don't know what it's going to change to. Could be anything. And I don't want to limit us, per our charter and our rules are different. They're conflicts with state law because we know state law is going to be changed. They're going to fix the taxes. Not fix it. They're going to change it at some point. Sorry. At some point, we don't know what that's going to be. And if we're holding ourselves to a different or a more stringent, we could be left sort of hung out to dry. And well, just because we just don't know. We don't know what they're going to do.
And this is an area where I think we should be more stringent than state law. So we can be more stringent than state law, and we are more stringent than state law as it's written today. So what I'm saying is I would like for 4 members of the council to have to vote in favor of a tax increase.
You're not saying just any budget, but just a specific budget that raises.
Well, if you have 6 members here and 4 vote for it, then if 3 vote for it, it's not going to pass. So you have to have 4 instead of having 4 of 7. You have 4 of 6.
But just to be clear, as I heard earlier, if we have 5 members present,
That would be a quorum.
if we have 5 members present and 3 people vote in favor of the tax increase, under state law, the tax increase passes. If we have 5 members present and 3 people vote in favor of the tax increase, it would not pass under the current charter.
Right.
But who has more power, the state or the city?
The charter can, it's going to be different in every circumstance, but in this circumstance.
Well, in this circumstance,
in
if
this
someone
circumstance,
challenges
yeah.
this by state law, would a court look at that and say that you have to do what state law says, not what the city says?
Your charter would control in this instance and require a supermajority or a majority of the entire council, and that would be given effect by the courts if challenged.
Mr. Mayor, I have a possible compromise. If we said requires a majority with no less than 4 council members voting yes, or voting to approve, would that?
I think that's what it says now.
That's what it says now?
That's a
Then it's not a
supermajority.
compromise.
What
Well,
happens if
there's a
5?
difference. This is requiring a supermajority, which is 4 of 7.
What?
If you have 4 of 6, that's not a supermajority.
No. What this is saying, it requires a majority of the entire council. not a majority of the quorum, is what it's saying. So 4 out of 7 is a majority of the entire council. So if the council was, if everybody's here and voting, does the mayor votes, right? Yeah. So if everybody's here and voting, it's a majority of the entire council. But it can't be a majority of a quorum.
What happens, Mayor, if we're up against a deadline and we only have 5 people show up and we have that 3-2 split?
Per the charter, we could not do it. We probably wouldn't even take the vote.
Then what happens? We don't pass
Well,
the
it would
budget
take
in
a vote,
time?
but it would fail.
Yeah.
If it was a 3-2 vote, under the terms of your charter, it would fail.
So if you got 2 council members that don't want it to pass, they don't show up.
Yeah, so they just don't.
So they can
and then
control it.
goes away.
Well, you have to have a quorum. If you have 4 people show and 4 people's a quorum, then, and all 4 of them vote for it, then it's passed.
I don't think anything less than 4 people should decide to increase taxes. I just don't think that should be the case. If truth in taxation is triggered, not less than 4 people should have to vote in favor of the tax increase.
Of course, this doesn't mention truth in taxation at all. This just talks about a budget.
But again, truth in taxation, all that does is it triggers the public hearings and the process.
But our charter does not mention truth in taxation. It just talks a budget period.
So if we just put, instead of in accordance with state law, we just put the budget must be adopted by at least 4 positive.
But he's talking about
Votes.
super taxation, and this is talking about the budget.
I know, that's what I'm saying.
So-
All we do is say the budget shall be adopted by 4 affirmative votes.
And I just want to make it clear that the only reason I'm mentioning truth in taxation is because we're deferring now to state law, and it is truth in taxation law that sets up our meeting standards.
But if we take that state law statement out of there and just put be adopted by 4, is that not what you want to see, is 4 people voting for it?
I'm just suggesting that we leave the 4/7 in place. That's all I'm suggesting.
But what if you only have 6 people at the meeting?
4 people can still vote in favor
That's
for.
not 4/7.
If you had 6 people, a majority would still be 4. You'd have
But
to
that's
have-
not what this says. This says 4 of 7.
What that means is a majority of the entire council. It's just,
Supermajority?
Yeah, no matter who shows up, you have 7 on the council. Right.
so a majority of the entire council would mean 4. It means the same thing.
So that's fine with me.
Okay.
That would be fine.
Yeah, I don't want to take out the state law. We've got to say that. I don't want to get specific any more than that, because state law will change. But I'm fine with the 4.
Okay.
As long as it can be 4 if there's 6 people here, whatever. Yeah.
Okay, the next change was recommended by council, and this makes it compliant with state law in 1206. The annual audit shall occur 180 days after the close of the fiscal year. 1303 was deleted as redundant. The power to borrow, this language came from your bond counsel. We took it verbatim as your bond counsel recommended.
I have a question regarding the language of bonds, though, and Gabe, you probably can help best with this. So we have certificate of obligations, revenue bonds, and general obligation bonds. And as I'm understanding this change, we're basically saying that our revenue bonds in the old language could not be counted as city debt. The old language basically says a revenue bond cannot be considered city debt. And the way that I'm reading this new language is that it's saying that all bonds would be considered city debt. Is that the best way to summarize that?
Currently, all bonds are city debt, but we distinguish between general obligation, or those that are paid with property taxes versus revenue bonds, which are paid by enterprise fund sources.
Okay, I'm just reading, it says, in no event, however, shall revenue bonds be considered an indebtedness of the city of Saginaw. That was the old language. And that language is being eliminated.
But it also says, nor required to be repaid with funds secured by taxation.
And that's
So-
what we're talking about here. I just want to make sure that a revenue bond is a bond that should be paid back through revenues of
Enterprise.
water and enterprise.
That's enterprise, yeah.
And what I'm concerned about is that the new language, it eliminates that differentiation, is the way I'm reading the new language. Does that happen in this new language?
I don't think so. No. Bond counsel is not going to recommend something that's outside of state law or would create a burden to taxpayers and not ratepayers.
That's why
That
that's
clarifies.
why they are a revenue bond.
Correct. Yeah, they're not.
That's the nature of what it is versus.
No, I understand the function, and I'm just, I don't want to belabor, but I want to make the point that if we do incur say a capital improvement project that is funded with revenue bonds, and there is need to supplement those revenue bonds because of some downturn in water purchases or something along those lines, and we need to use other revenue sources like tax monies to pay back that bond. Are we able to do that with this new language as to where we were not able to do that
I don't
before?
think state law will allow that.
May need to clarify from bond counsel, but I think the differentiation between GO bonds and CO bonds is they're backed with the full faith and credit of the city. But the difference here is that our utility system, it's their capacity, not the city's capacity. Because we're not going to, if we go, we have some utility project that our rates don't make or, some catastrophic event, we're not going to supplement it with general funds. Right?
Okay, we're not going to supplement that by matter of practice, or is it galvanized in the charter, I guess is what I'm asking? Because it was originally galvanized in the charter with language, very specific language, but that language no longer exists. So I'm just asking, is the opportunity there now to borrow from one pot to pay back another?
I think that's going to be established in your covenants when you issue debt. I mean, I'm not aware of any system bonds that you're going to double dip system revenues and back them up with tax revenue.
But
Right.
wouldn't that be protected under state law, though? If you say something is being issued as a revenue bond, it's for the utility companies, even though some areas could be defined as where they do cross over for use. But if you define it that way initially, you can't really redo or take back what you defined as what you established for revenue. I think state law won't let us do that. And it's caught by an auditor, probably, is where that would be caught and brought to our attention.
And the bond counsel, when you issue that debt, is going to say, here's what it's backed by.
Okay, so we feel like this has not increased the opportunity to move money from revenue-generated bond payments to tax revenue bond payments?
No.
Okay.
If you look at the last sentence, the proceeds of bonds or other evidence of indebtedness issued or incurred by the city shall be used only for the purpose for which the bonds or other indebtedness was issued or incurred.
So it's going to state initially, this is an enterprise issue, or this is general obligation.
So it's just eliminating the language of a revenue bond. It's saying,
Yeah.
if it's dedicated as this type bond, it will be that type bond for the life of it. Okay.
Commission in, uh-oh. I'm missing a page 39, I guess.
That was 39. 39 was the bonds.
Oh, never mind. Okay, good. The Planning and Zoning Commission, you have a residency requirement. The commission chose to retain that. That's not a state law requirement. The language in 1404 was confusing, and it established procedures that weren't currently being followed. So the commission recommended deleting most of B.
Can I back up to 1401 just to ask a question regarding the residency? 1401A, reside in the city with 6 months. What would be wrong with making that 1 year? I think 6 months doesn't necessarily give someone enough time to really understand our city as well, and also a little bit more investment in the city than just 6 months. Would anybody have a problem with it being a year instead of 6 months?
You want that out too?
I would only just, as a devil's advocate, mention that, and Janice will be able to help us on this, we seem to have a problem getting enough people to volunteer for some of these boards. Do you think in the case of planning and zoning it would be difficult to find someone? In other words, would that make a difference in being able to find a
I
qualified?
don't think so, because most of our people, we check that, and most of them have been here a year or more. Occasionally, we'll get one or two that'll apply, but not very much.
I mean, most people want to be on P&Z anyhow. That's,
Well,
that's the
yes.
most high-profile board people want to be on. That's the others we have issues with. Right?
And if somebody wants to serve, if they really want to serve, I usually will suggest to someone, find a position that's open. If the P&Z is already full, find a position that's open, serve there, and get some experience before you jump into. That's a very important position in our city.
Well, we also have 2 alternate positions on the P&Z board, and what we did in this recent one was the new people that came in, we moved the alternates up,
We've always done that.
and then those people come in the alternate.
Right, yeah.
So, I mean, by the time they move up, they're probably here for a year anyway.
Well, but not from the initial input of going on to, an alternate can vote if there is a voting member missing. So they have the same abilities if there's a voting member missing. I just feel like that for this position in our city, there needs to be more than just 6 months in the city and bam, you're on to a pretty important commission.
You want a year?
Okay, thank you.
It was just pointed out to me, too, that in A, the commission shall meet at least once monthly, may schedule additional meetings. It was pointed out that it doesn't always meet every month. So you might want to consider deleting that.
Or can we just say meet as needed?
Yeah. Yeah. So, recall. Since your charter was adopted after 1985,
I'm sorry, before we move
Yeah,
to recall, want to make sure that we touch the general building regulations.
oh, yep,
So that's 1405.
yeah.
So one thing I want to make sure of is that since we are eliminating what would be considered a limitation, I would like to insert the words by ordinance after regulate in the first sentence. The city may regulate by ordinance. I just don't want this to be an all-powerful clause without having an ordinance in place to regulate. Does that make sense?
kind of, this is, again, one of those provisions that you already have this authority. It's not giving the city any authority. You have the authority to regulate according to state law, and that would be by ordinance if you're going to be having a, you know,
I'd just like for
Yeah.
the ordinance
Yeah.
to be in there. Because the only reason I'm saying that is whenever you say city, I don't know that that differentiates an administrative change or a legislative change.
There are going to be certain instances, I mean, you'll have an ordinance like for your substandard buildings and for stuff
Right.
like that, but there may be an instance where something calamitous has happened and your building official has to go in and there's no ordinance, and you wouldn't want, and where state law gives him the authority to take care of a matter, and your charter is limiting that because it requires an ordinance. 99% of the time when a city acts, it's going to be by ordinance, but there might be, I can't think of any instance right now off the top of my head, where your building official would have to act and there would not be an ordinance in place. And that would, I wouldn't want to limit his ability to take care of a situation.
And I certainly understand that when we're talking about guarding against calamities, fire, flood, and windstorm, that sort of thing. But this is an area that I have seen personally abused in cities across the state, where an administrative function has taken liberties far beyond what they should without legislative control. So if the ordinance is put in there, if by ordinance is put in there with the exception of a calamitous event, something along those lines, I think that would be appropriate. I just want to make sure that we are limiting this to a legislative function.
Okay.
And does that change, have any conflict with state law?
I can't think of any instance when it would. In general, that is how we are going to regulate, you know, substandard structures and we have that authority whether or not this section is in here. I just want to make very clear that we're not limiting our authority at all. And I can't think of anything off the top of my head right now, but that where the city would act without an ordinance. In general, it would. So initiative, referendum, and recall only exist in Texas if it's provided for in the charter. There is no state law that governs initiative, referendum, and recall. So the parameters of initiative, referendum, and recall are as set forth in your charter. The only caveat to that is the requirements for validation of a signature are governed by Chapter 277 of the Texas Election Code. And that applies to any charter that was in place after 1985. If it was in place prior to 1985, the charter provisions control. Since your charter is after 1985, Chapter 277 controls. So that said, the first change in 1502, each petition must contain information required by Chapter 277 instead of having additional requirements for the validity of a signature. You'll see, though, in initiative and referendum, we left some of the requirements, and I'll get to those when we get there, why we left them, even though they may be superseded by Chapter 277. So, did you want to talk about?
Yes, I've had a brief discussion before the meeting, and I just think we should discuss this because when this went into effect, we had about 5,000 people in our city, and we only required 250 votes to call an election of any of these three types: recall, initiative, or referendum. Since we now have 16,000 registered voters, I believe. Do we think that number should be raised, the amount that are required to be on the petition? Because we only had 5,000 people. Now we've got 23,000, but 16,000 registered voters. It's just something I think we should discuss.
Well, doesn't it say 25% or 250,
It
whichever
says
is
no
greater?
less than. We are never going to have,
But it says whichever
25% is less than 250.
whichever is
Okay.
greater, though.
Yeah, but we don't have enough voters that it's going to be greater. We don't have very many people vote.
25%.
Of like maybe
Last election is
we
what it
don't
says.
hardly have very many voters that it would be over 250.
Well,
What I'm saying is, quite often, especially let's say it's if it was when two people, nobody gets a runoff election.
Well, no, but this is 25% of the votes cast in the last regular municipal
Regular,
election.
in a
So that's-
recall
So
election.
that will be May. That's your May election.
So a recall wouldn't count.
No.
But even in the last May election,
Well,
do
but
you
it wasn't
remember-
recall, it was a runoff
Runoff.
election, not recall.
Do you remember how many people voted in the last May election? 400. So a quarter of 400 is 100. Or no less than 250. I just wonder if the no less than figure should be raised. Right, she said runoff
But
doesn't.
that was a special election.
But the regular May election had 400 and something voters. And that will vary from election to election depending on how many people are running for one particular place. But we've seen very low votes. So I think it's quite likely that 25% of the people voting is less than 250. But should we raise the 250 to a higher figure? Do we want 250 people to call an election for the city? Do we want to give that power to that few people? That's all I'm saying.
Well, that is a good point. That's a good point. Yeah.
I'm just, because elections are expensive, and someone could be a real good salesperson and just want something to happen. Put an ordinance in effect, or let's say we approve an ordinance, and a certain group of people don't like the fact that we approved that ordinance. And they might be able to get 250 people on a petition that would require an election. I'm not saying,
Janice,
I'm not just pounding my fist. I'm saying
How
we need
many
to talk
registered
about it.
voters do we have in the city right now, roughly? 16 to 17,000 registered voters. Why would it be unrealistic to say we need to have 1,000 people sign up to have a recall election?
And Mary, did you have a number in mind?
I didn't have a number in mind. I just thought that from a population of 5,000,
Yeah.
perhaps we need to raise that.
I think that our recall initiative and referendum should be a reflection of our voting demographic, because there are people that don't care. And what I'm getting at is if you don't care enough to get up and vote, you don't get an opportunity to recall. And what I'm saying is that I think that we should be looking at our voting demographic. Even if it's only 500 people, we should allow that 500 people or a percentage thereof to make the decisions of the city. Less than 250 people vote for any one person on this council gets a seat. That's just the way it is. So I think it's a terrible problem that we have 16,000 people that are registered to vote and only 500 of them show up. But I think that any referendum, any initiative, or any recall should be a reflection of our voting demographic and not the total number of registered voters in the city.
And I think that's a valid point. I just think we should do whatever the majority of the council wants. And I just thought it was worthy of discussion because the population has grown quite a bit more than that.
Well, and the signers of this petition don't have to have been qualified to have voted in the last election. If there's 16,000 potential signers out there, and 20 people want to see a recall or all they got to do is go to those voters and just have them sign. So if 250 of them sign, then we have to have an election that's very expensive. If we put 1,000 as a number, then they're going to have to work a lot harder to get that recall election and cause us to have to spend the money for another election.
And I have another point, and I have a question. So let's say we raise that number, and the voters didn't like the fact that we raised that number, and they voted against that proposition. That would not void the whole, that would just
No,
void
it
that
would just
one
go back to
proposition.
the way, if
For that-
it doesn't pass, it goes back to the way it's
Just
worded
that
now.
one item would be affected.
Right, right.
So really, we won't be hurting anything, because worst thing that can happen is it'll just go back to 250. If they vote against it, no harm has been done, it'll just stay the same. So I can see both sides of the argument. I just think the whole council should make a decision.
Some charters also provide 25, not, or a certain percentage of the registered voters of the city, which is a much bigger number. So, but,
Well, when your average turnout is 4%, I think it's important that we also point out, and we all understand, that these particular things, the initiative and referendum, are restrictions on the voter. They're not restrictions on us. They're restrictions on the voter. And I'm perfectly fine leaving restrictions on the voter alone at this point, not increasing restrictions on the voter.
Excuse me. What does anybody else think? Charlie, what do you think? Cindy, what do you think? Valerie?
Well, what about if it was 25% with 5,000, 250? We triple, I guess that's 750. That's triple the number. We triple down on the voters.
Well, we didn't have 5,000 registered voters when this was put in place. We had a population of 5,000.
Okay, well, our population now is what?
22.
22, 23.
1250?
But if we get 1,000 people to sign the petition, that doesn't mean we have to have 1,000 people come vote.
They just have to be 1,000 registered voters.
Right.
Out
And
of
you could still have
16,000.
179 people vote.
although in a recall, you often have a lot more people voting.
You're right. You'll have more people coming out on a recall. People vote. They'll come out and vote against something before they vote for the responsibility.
So pick a number.
I said 1,000.
1,000's fine.
I think 1,000 is pretty high. Actually, I think it's really high.
Perfectly fine with 250.
I'll-
25% of the voting population, those that voted.
And what does everybody think? What does the majority of the council think? Mary, what number would you like?
I'm sorry, 500 or 750 would be fine with me as a compromise.
Charlie? Valerie?
How about 750?
Mr. Farr?
I'll stay the same.
Okay. David?
750.
Yeah, I think 750 is too much. I wouldn't go much over 500, and I was going to say 350, but I'll go with what the majority of council thinks. I think 250 is a small number. I would go with raising that sum. So, what does everybody want to do?
And how many times has this come up in the last 30 years? So it doesn't. It's sort of a moot point. The citizens are going to have to prove it
Okay, why don't we?
one way or the other.
250 and 750, let's just say 500.
If 500 is the top number I'd want to go. I think that's anything above that is asking too much.
That's the mid-mark between 250 and 750.
Anybody
Well,
else?
but you got your majority at 1,000 though.
No, 750.
You have your majority
No,
of
if the
1,000.
majority wants to go to 1,000, that's fine.
So, but if you want to compromise and go to 500,
Well-
so that we're a little bit more on the same page, we could go to 500, be fine too.
I just look at, we were 5,000 citizens, we're 22,000 now, so we're looking at a little over 4 times as many citizens. We're just doubling the number of required signatures. That's why, I was fine with 750.
And those people that are putting this together that may request one of these items, they're not going to have a concern about what an election costs. And if they can just get the number of signatures required that will force us to spend the money on election, it may not be something that's necessary.
Well, the last recall item, what did they have? 100 names or something, and some of them were from Fort Worth. They weren't even
We had more
registered
than that, but
voters.
they were mostly out of the city.
That's what I'm saying.
So
They weren't
were
even registered
disqualified.
voters.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
It's still a mechanism that allows those that feel they need it to exercise it, but not frivolously. So
All right, so 500? What do y'all think? Oh, Janice, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was just going to add that regardless of where you put it, whoever's doing the petition is going to have to get way more than that, because when we verify, we ran into this with the alcohol permit years ago. Some of those people aren't going to live here. Some of them aren't going to be registered. Some of them didn't sign right. Some this and that. So even though you've got 250 or 500 or 750, that's not. They can't just come in with that amount, or they're not going to be approved for it. So just something to think about.
How about we just raise the percentage, instead of 25% of those who voted, raise it to 50%?
So 400 or 450 in the last election, roughly? Or is that-
But if we turn it to 750 votes, that's more than any election that this city has ever seen. So,
yeah, there's signatures, but we just all said we would drop it to 500 if that would be more reasonable instead of 750.
They're going to have to get 750 signatures to 500,000 signatures. And if they really want it, they're going to be happy with it.
I can tell you, if more than 250 registered voters sign it, whoever votes against it will not be sitting on the council the next go-around, because 250 gets you off the seat.
But I wouldn't. In my mind, I'm not gonna react from a political standpoint. If they want a recall and they have the number of people, then I don't know that we have a choice other than to allow it. I just don't want someone to come in with some frivolous recall that's going to create a lot of work for our staff to put an election together that's going to cost us a lot of money. If it's legitimate and they have enough signatures, then I'm not going to vote against it. I mean, it's no
Well,
reason to.
it's a ministerial duty to approve it if the signatures are.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
Right, we would have a choice if they were
Right,
valid.
right.
Mary, I'm
Right.
sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask Betsy, trying not to put you on the spot, is there do you have some idea of what cities our size might have,
I
or
see
does it just
250.
vary?
It just varies, and to be honest, once this number's set, it's really this is a power reserved to the people, and once these numbers are set, it's often hard to raise the bar of the exercise of that power. So,
Have you seen cities with a 500 requirement?
to be honest, I don't pay a whole lot of attention to the
Okay.
numbers, but
So you just-
usually 250 is a normal number. I've seen percentages of registered voters, but it's
So you've seen 250 with maybe larger
no
number of people in the city? Or
I wish I brought the Blodgett book with me. I didn't bring it, I don't think. He has lots of examples in that book, but I didn't bring the book. it's really, there's no set number or set percentage or, I've seen numbers as low as this in larger cities because, they start out as small cities and it's hard to change these numbers once they're in the charter. But
So just I want to point out, too, that there are other things that we're doing with initiative and referendum later in this discussion that are adding things that cannot be recalled.
Right, and I'm going to talk about that. It's called, when we get there, it's called the field of initiative and referendum, and it's removing items from the field.
Yes, so what we're doing is not only are we increasing the number of people to sign, now we're also removing things from the field that they can recall. And we're starting to really get into the voters at this point and making decisions for them. So we got to be very careful about this in my mind. I mean, we're giving them the opportunity to vote for this in the future, in May possibly, but these decisions that we're making are basically handcuffing our voters. So I just want to be careful about what we're doing here.
Okay, so we're still on 1502, petition for recall. What do we want to go with? Want to go with 500? What does everybody think? Mary, you okay with that? Mitch, Sarah? You okay with that? Valerie? Patrick?
Stay at 250.
Mr. Flory?
500.
500? All right. We'll go to 500 then. If everybody's okay with that, we'll put that on the ballot.
So 1507 established a time frame in which the election had to be called. 20 years ago, recall elections were not included in uniform election dates. They were one of the exemptions. They are not anymore, so it does have to be held on a uniform election date.
Will you define uniform election date, please?
Okay, uniform election date are dates established by the state legislature on which we can hold elections.
That would be May and November?
In May and November.
Okay.
And so it would have to be either the May election or the November election.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, initiative and referendum. And if you read my comments, you currently have removed from the field. Removed from the field means topics and matters that can be submitted for either initiative, which is an ordinance the voters are proposing, or referendum, which is a ordinance that the voters are objecting to and want to be presented for a vote. So currently we have levying taxes, setting the rates for services, adoption of a budget, or any subject where state law requires a public hearing.
So to clarify, those are currently in the charter as removed from the field.
Removed from the field.
Okay.
And there are other matters that have been removed from the field by courts of competent jurisdiction. But what we have seen courts do is, if there is a question whether or not it's removed from the field, the courts will require that an election be held, and then if it passes, then you go back to court and say this is removed from the field and we're not going to give it effect. So it's burdensome and cumbersome for cities when it's removed from the field, but you have to hold an election anyway. So that's why if I'm drafting a charter, I will always put, or any matter a court of competent jurisdiction has determined to be removed from the field of initiative or referendum. That forestalls the problem that keeps us from having to call an election when we know it's not going to be given effect if it passes. So what was considered to be added, and this was recommended by your bond counsel, authorizing the issuance of bonds or other evidence of indebtedness. That's from your bond counsel. Personnel matters are the two that are being suggested to be added in addition to the competent jurisdiction.
Actually, ordinances is also in there. So I want to be very careful there, because an ordinance, that's, if we're now saying that we will refuse our voters the opportunity to either initiate or remove by referendum an ordinance, that's pretty significant.
Doesn't it say ordinances levying taxes?
That's not really a change. Initiative power may be used to enact a new ordinance or repeal or amend sections of an existing ordinance. That was currently there. So that addition of the word ordinance, I don't think changes that. The power is limited only to ordinances.
So the word ordinances that has been added is specific to ordinances that levy taxes. Is that correct?
Taxes can't be levied except for by ordinances, but the entire power of initiative and referendum is limited to ordinances. So it'd be an ordinance setting rates for service, an ordinance adopting a budget, or an ordinance establishing, personnel matters.
All I'm wanting to make certain of here is that by adding the word ordinances, we're not saying all ordinances are off the field.
No.
Okay.
No.
That's why I'm wanting to clarify this, because otherwise, why would the word ordinances need to be added? And I'm curious about it.
But it doesn't say ordinances levying taxes.
I don't remember if that was added by me or the bond council, but it really is just, it doesn't change the meaning of the section. It certainly doesn't eliminate any ordinance from being considered.
It just falls within the brackets.
Yeah, ordinances levying taxes, ordinances authorizing the issuance of bonds or other evidences.
Okay, so it's specific to those.
Items in the parentheses.
Got it. So with that understood, this narrows referendum and initiative to essentially financial matters only, and then the personnel point that you've made.
Those are not subject to initiative or referendum.
Right.
Financial.
It removes them from the field.
Right.
Right. So these are financially related or personnel related, or something that a court of competent jurisdiction determines.
Right. Or matters where, for example, zoning is removed from the field. And this would be removed from the field here because zoning requires public hearings. Your charter currently removes from the field any matter that requires a public hearing, and that would be annexation and zoning and budgets. And so that is already removed from the field under the terms of your current charter. For example, one of our cities out west has an initiative petition for the regulation of chickens. So
we missed that one, didn't we?
yeah. So there's lots of matters that are subject to initiative and referendum. But.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, moving on.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead, Cindy.
Again, we have the 25% of the number of votes cast in the last regular municipal, or 250.
Yeah, we'll go through and change that to 500 for all of them.
Okay, thank you.
So we're getting near the end.
But you're not the last item on the list.
So 1713 is the next one where we suggested a change. So currently, and again, I don't know if we explained it very well in the comments, but your ethics provision in your charter is broader than that required by state law. Section B applies to employees. That provision would usually apply to just the council members under state law under 171. If you have a conflict of interest, if you have a substantial interest in a matter that's being discussed. But you have applied to employees as well. But it's like state law. You're not prohibited from having an interest. You're prohibited from participating in the matter if you have an interest. And that is very similar to state law. What the language that we didn't like, it says no officer or employee having a direct or indirect interest, and that is very nebulous. I mean, that could be Uncle Joe's, your Uncle Joe's has a contract selling paper to the city, and that would be something you'd have to disclose and somehow refrain from participation. So we took the language from state law, which is a substantial interest, and we added that definition so that you'll know when you have an interest that's going to be in conflict. And then the other provision is what is now D. And the city of Saginaw shall not purchase goods or services from or enter into contracts for any such goods or services with the mayor or any other member of the city council. And again, that is much broader than state law. State law, again, is governed by Chapter 171, and all it prohibits is participation in the matter. So we added except in compliance with state law. And so that is a substantive change because it does permit contracts if you comply with the requirements of 171, file an affidavit, and don't participate in the matter. Mm-hmm. And then 1715, I don't think is enforceable. Your staff suggested we delete it. You have a policy in your personnel manual that addresses this that would also be enforceable. If you looked at my comments, political activity is fairly complex, especially because police and fire have different rules that apply under state law that we are not permitted by charter or ordinance to change. And so since it is more complicated, it appeared to be easier to regulate that in your personnel policies rather than in your charter. The last one is bonds, and it was 17, it used to be 1719, 1718. You had an archaic amount. State law controls when performance, maintenance, and payment bonds are required, and so it's better just to go with state law than to establish amounts in your charter. So are there any more questions?
I don't question on 19, about the vote.
Okay.
Why don't we scratch that?
19?
Yeah, so it's Article 19.
What did I take out? I didn't take it out. Huh.
Well, it was only talking about the specific circumstances that had to do with this being the very first city charter, right? I think.
That's what it is. Yeah, and I have one previous generation because that was a comment from the city. Mm-hmm. Why don't we revise it? And I looked at it and I said, we'll just take it out. Mm-hmm.
So we don't need to say anything about just updating the charter. That didn't need to be covered? Okay. Great.
Great.
So this can stay or it can go. It doesn't make any difference. Mhm. You're welcome.
Yay.
Up and down. So the next step will be, you'll go off and write up some,
I'll draft the propositions,
Okay.
and then we'll bring you back an ordinance before February 15th.
okay? Well, I guess I got a question on that. Do we have to call the election on February 15th, but do we have to say exactly what we're going to cover? So we would have to have the proposals nailed down by February 15th? Okay.
What the ordinance calling, it will have the proposed revisions attached as a redlined exhibit, and then the propositions will be in the body of the ordinance. Yeah. So it's not too late to tweak things.
Okay. That's great. Thank you. All right. Where were we? I know. So we are at, we're at 5. So at 8:35, recess into workshop. And so we're going to item 6, direction to staff regarding smoke-free ordinance. Mr. City Manager.
Mayor and Council, you'll recall at last meeting we talked about interest regarding regulating smoking in the city. So the city attorneys provided some examples. Our basic options are to make no changes to what is currently in effect. Since the last time we met, staff found that there are only 2 locations that allow smoking in the city. We previously thought that number was 4. One, and my understanding, is under new ownership, and they're leaning the direction of going towards being smoke-free. So that would just leave us 1, which happens to be an outdoor patio. So really, we just need your direction. Once we get feedback, the city attorney will prepare an ordinance. It could prohibit at some defined date. It could grandfather existing businesses. We could make no change. We just need to hear from you.
Council thoughts. What does everybody think?
I have one question.
Yes, ma'am.
The laundromat's right next to the daycare, and they sit out there and smoke outside because they can't smoke inside. Would that prohibit that too?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
I think it.
If it's outdoors, it's okay. Okay.
Correct.
Hasn't the state or federal level addressed outdoor versus indoor? We can't prohibit outdoor smoking.
I was talking like on the business property. Because my kids walk around with cigarettes like this doing this. They see it.
Well, but that's outdoors.
Yeah, it is outdoors. There's
Not-
not a lot I can do about it.
Yeah, I'm not aware.
Especially private property outdoors.
I was just curious. I didn't know because it was a business.
The chief said we could consider that within some sort of setback distance or foot within a entrance or exit of a building, if that's council's desire.
Wow, but then you have to regulate that.
Sure, yeah.
It's a lot easier to regulate what's inside a door.
Chief, you'd then be the smoke police, right?
Carry a non-smoking gun.
All right, so how do we want to move forward with this? So we've got some options. I would certainly like to have some sort of ordinance in place. Most of the other cities around us have some kind of smoke-free ordinance. So I guess our options are, as you said, keep it as we have it now, make a smoke-free ordinance for everything, just blanket, or make a smoke-free ordinance with grandfather. That's really the 3 options. Is that
Considering that we only have 1 of 3 facilities that allow it now, is that correct? Why couldn't we just prohibit any future, smoking allowed and just grandfather that one business? Or allow
Have you
them
talked to that one business yet?
So we've talked with both. My understanding, one is under new ownership, and they're thinking about going smoke-free. Is that a fair assessment? The other allows smoking only on a outdoor patio that I think seasonally is closed in. So we're already partway there in that respect. So I I would guess, just based on national trends and within our region, it's assumed really in many places that public places are already smoke-free. You don't see a lot of new businesses come in that would allow it, so, which is why we only have 2 properties.
So I'd recommend that we set a period, like of 90 days from adoption, that businesses that are interested in retaining their opportunity to smoke apply for a permit for that, and then after the 90-day grace period, no more smoking in the city.
They would file for a grandfather, to be grandfathered, whatever.
So how long will that grandfather last?
Until a new business goes, a change of business,
Right, it would not go with the business, it would be.
change of occupancy.
I guess, and I'm okay with that as long as we would not allow folks that don't allow smoking now to change over to smoking. How would that work?
Yeah, you tell us, but that would be my understanding that we wouldn't allow any new, right, if we're going to regulate
Yeah,
going forward.
only those that already are.
Only for the 2 existing, yeah.
Well, I think
I would like to suggest 180 days instead of 90 days. That gives them, I mean, they've been that way for much longer than that. What difference is an extra 90 days to allow them to say they had due diligence? One of the 2, I spoke to the owner, and he kind of was hoping the city would enforce this so he wouldn't be the bad guy, and then he could be it, because he's a non-smoker. So, I would think he'll jump on board. Whoops, forgot to come in 180 days.
Well, what's it going to cost us to do the permit thing? I mean, we're talking about
One business.
one business, maybe 2 filing for a permit. I mean, I just don't see that the expense of that is warranted. I just say grandfather and be done. And if the owner wants to change over, he can blame the city if he wants to.
the only thing is I don't know how you would apply that ordinance. What would keep somebody from saying that they were a smoking facility? And that's the reason that I think we need to have a period of grace to say you'd better declare now or forever hold your peace. So that's why I'm suggesting the 90-day time period allows businesses to say, I was or was not smoking. And if they say they were and they were not, I mean, what keeps them from saying that in the future if we do not give them a grace period and a deadline? There's really nothing that keeps them from doing that.
And I'm okay with 90 days, too. It doesn't matter.
I have a question.
Mary, go ahead.
In the meeting before, when we discussed this, we talked about those that were grandfathered would still have to put filter systems or whatever in place. Are we wanting to do that or not?
Well,
Are you just saying-
the one does have them in place, and he said they don't work very well. So
it's
you're
like,
only talking one business probably that you would be forcing to do that, whereas there's not a lot of complaints if he's in an outdoor patio anyway.
Yeah,
That's what I started saying. Could
that's
they
my
just go out in the
understanding.
backyard or
One
something?
has the smoke mitigation system, and then the other is just outdoor. So,
okay.
yeah.
I choose to not patronize those businesses if I don't want to go there. Yeah. That's what drives smoking, non-smoking.
And so this would also prohibit any new businesses from coming in with smoke, any new smoking businesses, correct?
Concur.
But it would be kind of neat to say Saginaw smoke-free,
That's a good point. I mean, it's certainly a public health issue. Absolutely. So, council, what do we want to do? We've gone around and around about several things, how we'd like to move forward with this.
I would say we do as Patrick suggests and draft an ordinance to that effect.
Well, I'll entertain a motion then.
Well, we're in a workshop.
We are in a workshop, you're right.
Yeah, we just need direction. So just to be clear, we're going to offer this grace period or to the 2 that we know are existing. So somebody couldn't,
Right.
some restaurant couldn't say
I got passed over.
I'm going to change and go to smoking in the next 90
I would
days.
suggest that we leave it open to all, and if they declare it now, then we're at least exposing it. I'm afraid that if we offer it to 2 businesses and then 3 come back later and say, well, you didn't offer it to me, we've put ourselves in jeopardy. So I just want to be careful about that and just give them a period of grace, and if they don't say anything, then they've lost their opportunity.
So are we going to send it to every business in town?
Yeah, I think I might defer to the city attorney, but this ordinance would require public notice. Would the ordinance require public notice? So we would have,
Well, the notice would be just the same notice, publication in a newspaper.
Right.
Because it has a fine, penalty, or forfeiture.
right.
So there's no special notice, like zoning or anything that requires publication in a newspaper, but it doesn't hurt to do it if you want to.
But if you approached every business, it would probably cost the city a lot more time
Sure.
and labor than if you just went to the ones that currently are
And, yeah,
exercising that.
that's kind of what I'm getting at. We know there's 2.
And you
I don't-
still advertise publicly that
Right.
if you're interested, come forward.
Right.
Rick's going to tell them they
You
can't
just
do
put it
that.
on your website or something.
Yeah. Yep. We can do that.
So that's another point, though. Any businesses that are applying for certificates of occupancy in that grace period are not eligible.
Right.
We can. Yeah, we can do that. We'll have the city
90
attorney
days?
draft that.
I think 90 days is good.
I'm okay with 90 days.
Beautiful. We clear? We good?
Yep.
All right, then 8:46, we're out of a workshop. We reconvene back into a regular session. 7 is 2018 projects and accomplishments update. Gabe Rayam.
This will be the most exciting 2 hours of your evening. No, just kidding. Mayor and council, just want to kind of give an update of the past year. It's been my pleasure to serve as city manager. I've had a great year, and time flies when you're having fun. I've kind of put focused on people and policy and projects. So want to extend my thanks to our retired city manager, Nan Stanford. She left the city in a strong financial position with an excellent staff. So being the new guy walking in was a good situation to come into. Want to express my appreciation and thanks to your city staff. We have 150 plus just excellent people. As you're aware, we recently went through a core values identification process. Saginaw pride, professionalism, responsiveness, integrity, dedication, and efficiency. And your city staff embody those values every day, and I'm pleased to work alongside them. Just to recap, a few new faces. As you're aware, we hired Alora as our first Director of Economic Development earlier this year. Chief Howell cast a broad net and had a community-based selection committee and a public meet and greet. So it was good to get him on board. And at a past council meeting, you heard of all the things planned for the police department in the future. We're definitely headed towards great things. We started an intern program. We're on our, we had 2, and they've moved on to better things and finishing up school. So we have 2 new interns, and I think each of the directors here could tell you that they're very helpful and provide a lot of energy and good ideas for us, as well as being cheap hired hands. So we're pleased to have them. People, one thing I'm proud of in the past year is open communication and engagement. My personality, I'm pretty calm and approachable type, and like to tell farm stories, especially related to cows, which I've yet to impress that wisdom upon the Director of Economic Development. The mayor and I, similar family backgrounds, dairy farms, we're of like mind. But anyway, I enjoy when I'm out and about talking to people at Walmart, as I scream at my kids more times than not, seeing people in the rec center, what have you. It's a lot of fun. We've had a greater presence on social media simply because that's where people choose to receive a lot of information these days and digest information. An almost 50% increase in the amount of followers on the city page in 12 months' time. I don't think that's any one person. I just think that's the way society's trending. People really see social media, and we need to have a presence. So we're at almost 4,900 followers now. All of our directors have bios and profiles on our website because we're real live people, and it's always nice to put a face with a name because we have a small town atmosphere, and people really enjoy that and expect that. Aurora has done an economic development blog, which has been interesting, and I think residents really enjoy kind of hearing about what's going on and what may be coming soon. So you know, we held our Citizen Summit back in July. If I were to broadly summarize some of the marching orders and requests from citizens, it was for restaurants and entertainment, beautification, and a variety of housing options. So staff is working to fire on all cylinders to deliver some of those things. Talked about this a little bit earlier, made some organizational changes. Animal Services is under Community Services, and I think that's been a good move. That's kind of a critical area, and that there's a lot of emotion and sensitivity related to animals. I think that Keith and Community Services has done a good job, again, with a social media presence, as well as building a volunteer base. Our last council meeting, I guess we recognized our Eagle Scout who had the great donation. So we have a lot of volunteers and strong community support there. It's good to see. Kim was promoted to finance director. Melanie was recognized as HR director. And Chief Howell talked about a future structure for the PD as we look at retirements and the department's growth and expansion. Policy, I keep saying this when I send my weekly updates, we're close to the strategic plan. Probably within the next month we'll have a draft that we can bring to you to review. It's been a lot of work, but a lot of good work and a lot of thoughtful work that'll drive our decisions for a long time to come. Our city council policy was one of the first projects I undertook when I started. That was adopted in March of 18. Our financial management policy, as you know, we've workshopped that a number of times, and we're close to bringing that back to the council for action and approval. And also our multi-year financial plan is underway. We've engaged Lewis McLean. This may also serve as a way for us to think about a future bond election. More policy direction that you've approved. Our building improvement grant program was adopted. The Fort Worth, was it Real Estate Council? Real Estate Council highlighted that in an email that went out to their hundreds of members. So really excited to see Saginaw get some recognition in that respect. And our economic development incentive policy was reviewed and approved last year. Special events, one of the things I hear, and I'm a little biased because I have young kids, but people really like special events and participate in special events and want more. So our Training Grain Festival and committee is doing work now, planning for an October 2019 event. So we're really excited to bring that back. We had our show and tell open house, and as you know, monsoon rains happened to be upon us that day, but we had a good time, and probably a benefit that I didn't really think about was it was a lot of fun citywide to have employees talk with each other. So there was a bounce house, and in our house, if there's a bounce house, then it's a good event, so my kids enjoyed it. We'll try again on our parade. I think the fire department led that effort in planning, and once we get the weather to cooperate, that's something we're looking forward to, and I think our residents really want to see in the future. Why not have a New Year's Eve event? I mean, it'd give me a reason to, I'm just throwing this out there, to stay up later than, I think I went to bed at 8:30 with the baby. So maybe I could make it till 9:30. But again, one thing I hear from residents and people really seem to let us know that they appreciate our special events. So it's something we may consider in the future. Some departmental projects, our public safety radio upgrade and replacement, we're close to going live. Very important that our first responders and police and fire have solid functional equipment. We're proceeding down the path of departmental accreditations for our three largest departments, police, fire, and public works. The rental inspection program, you will recall we talked about that in the spring, and that was included as part of the budget process. It's in effect as of January 1st, so our building inspectors will be focusing on multifamily units first. I imagine we'll probably see a lot of things that need to be corrected, and it's certainly a health and safety program. So we completed an IT assessment early this year, and we will have a facility assessment with some options for future facilities coming for your review and approval here soon. That may lend itself to future bond projects. Other projects, we've worked on beautification. The light crust flower signage was restored last year. We were awarded, after our first application, which I was really happy, our first try, $500,000 in green ribbon grants for landscaping beautification. That'll go to construction in summer 2019. Our beautification committee became a recognized affiliate of Keep Saginaw, or Keep Texas Beautiful, which has statewide brand recognition and also allows us to be eligible for grants. We also have talked about and are still talking about a Saginaw Boulevard overlay, which we'll continue to refine and bring back for your review in the future. Our food truck park is coming. Dirt should be moving soon. We're really excited. I think that hopefully serves as a catalyst project to generate some action in that corner, in that commercial corridor, and it's something that people really want. Project Dream Play, I was happy to see, received a pretty big donation, $70,000 some dollars. So the council approved a cost share match. Once they get their half, then the city will go ahead and initiate the project. I want to talk about that sooner rather than later because we're close to the finish line, and that's a playground that we'll all be proud of and we all need in our community. Our budget process, we started early and talked often. I think that we'll continue this coming year. Our youth council was happy. We've been working on it for several months, but we announced the 18 members of the council this week. So that's live on Facebook, and really excited to work with those students and to hear their thoughts, get them engaged. Still working on a sister city program, which I think could be fun and a great benefit to the city. Our chicken ordinance was a hotbed of, this is getting close to my bedtime. I usually have pretty good one-liners or puns, but I'm spent at this point. But I'm here to tell you that the chicken ordinance, it's kind of a bust. I mean, we've had less than 10 permits issued, so after a lot of controversy, some might say, we're all still pretty happy, and not a lot of birds in the city at this point.
So we don't have, wild chickens just running rampant through the city, rampaging?
I'm not aware. I'm not aware. But keep your eyes open as you drive home. Right. Some thoughts on 2019. This is my second to last slide. We'll have retirements and have to look at succession planning in the near future. I want to talk about a performance-based compensation philosophy. We'll continue our efforts in beautification and redevelopment. We're close to mixed-use development. I don't know where to land first, but there's certainly interest, and we've talked about some that are coming in the future that I think will turn dirt in 2019. Probably a little too soon to talk about charter amendments, so I need to sleep on that. We've given that our honest attention for the evening, but that could be going to our voters, and very important project, and thankful to have the commission spend their time and make recommendations. We've talked about potential project in creating an economic development corporation, which we'll continue to do, and a bond election as well, with a scope and projects that we'll talk about in the next few months, potentially. So Terrell Owens, top 10 wide receiver, great athlete, terrible teammate, but I do like some of his phrases. So for 2019, get your popcorn ready. Thank you, Terrell, and that's all I have.
Gabe, I'd also, if you don't mind, I'd like to mention that we've also started the community garden, and we should have some produce to harvest probably in the next few days.
That's yes, I'm glad you mentioned that. We have a pilot project, which you may have seen out on the lot next door. We've been delayed in getting signage. When we talked about doing this project, we couldn't win for losing with the weather, but our intention is in the spring to have a bigger project and some more fanfare, and also have some signage and let people know it's there. So we've also talked about doing fruit trees as kind of a conversation point to start, planting some fruit trees in our parks. Our good friends at TCC have provided some guidance as to what native plants would work well. So, yeah, lots of fun things that are agriculturally related. So,
And the butterfly garden as well.
Right,
in the spring.
right.
And I am very proud of the fact that we have added an extra day for transportation for elderly and disabled.
Yes.
And we have the flyers, and people are very excited about that.
That was definitely a great benefit. I will say one of the more important lessons I've learned in the past year is when Dan O'Leary took me around to meet city staff. I was talking and saying hello on a Wednesday in the senior center, which is bingo day, and I was quickly shushed. So I encourage you all to go to bingo day. It's a fun experience. I don't know that I'm bold enough to call the numbers, but don't be talking on bingo day at the senior center.
All right, thank you, Gabe. Well done. Great summary. All right, so we are at action item number 8, executive session. Pursuant to Texas Government Code 551.074 at, what time is it? 9:02. We're in executive session to discuss city manager. We will return to adjourn.
Mayor, I'm going to leave. You're welcome. You're welcome. Oh, that's okay. No. I'm working on 5 charters right now, and they all need to be wrapped up. So, you're welcome.
You have a long drive?
No, well, yeah, I'm in Westport Worth, so I'm not just around the loop.
I don't feel bad then. I'm in Carrollton. So.
Well, at least this is a straighter shot than
It's a straight shot, and I was just checking the weather. It looks like it's 32 degrees now.
Oh, is it? Well, hopefully it's not freezing.
Yeah, it's just traveling.
Good questions, so that's good.
I appreciate you. Thanks.
Nice meeting you. Yeah. Yeah. So they did say 32, but I thought that it's supposed to be a low 33. But I'll make it. I've got a good car.
Staying?
Hell no, I'm staying. Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Somebody told me this morning it was going to be a short meeting. I knew better than that.
Yeah.
Everybody back? All right, at 9:16, we return from executive session. Item, 9 is adjournment.
Move to
I make a motion to adjourn.
All those in favor, raise your right hand.
We're done.
9:16, we're adjourned. Thank y'all.